What's up? Welcome to our Last of Us Part 2 Drunken Spoilercast. This is full-on story spoilers for the game. If you do not have the game finished, if you have not yet finished it, go finish it, come back, watch this when you're already done, because once again, we get into spoilers immediately. Do not watch or listen to this without having played the game. And who you're going to see on this call or hear on this call is myself. I'm Janet from IGN. We have Lucy, who is also from IGN. We have Jean from Washington Post, Blessing from Kinda Funny, and two absolutely fantastic freelancers, Laura and Natalie. It is worth noting that Natalie did the Last of Us Part 2 review for Paste, so give that a read if you have not already. I will put links in the description for everyone's social media and their Twitter if you want to go ahead and follow and check out the work we do when we're not drunk, because I think that is worth checking out. And the other thing I will say is for this episode, I noticed that my mic is a little bit lower than everyone else's, so you might have to turn up the volume a little bit more than you're used to, which makes like the other parts a little bit louder, so sorry about that. I did consider editing all of my bits to be louder, but it would take a really long time because this is a really long episode. If I do this kind of thing again, I will be sure to adjust the levels accordingly so that I can have that bit be a bit more evened out. So thank you for the understanding on that part, and I hope you enjoy.
Yeah, I'm super curious about like what the impressions are going to be like 2 weeks from now, because now that it's launch day and most people haven't played it, you're seeing like all the takes kind of feed through. I was actually kind of surprised to see we uploaded our Spoilercast this morning, and I went to the video. Usually, I skip out on reading comments because I don't care what people have to say, but like I went to pull the video so I could share it on Twitter, and I was surprised to see like the like dislike ratio be split in half, where it was like 50-50 of likes and dislikes, and that's not like usual on our videos. And that was like a thing that Greg brought up this morning to me, and I was like, yeah, like what was up with that? And he's just like, yeah, dude, like people are very split on this game in a weird way, and you imagine that, yeah, since today is release day, like most of those people that are either review bombing or like going into content and like thumbing down, like haven't actually played the game. You imagine that they either read spoilers or for some reason might have heard something that just turned them off to the game, and like. In a weird way, I kind of feel for them, because like after playing the game and knowing like the big reveals and the big plot beats, like if you came to me and you were like, oh yeah, so what happens is Joel dies, and then the person who kills Joel, you then play them and they're the main character. I'm like, wait, what the fuck? Like if I heard that, I'd be like, yo, that's wild. Like very like out of context, I'd be like, that's a wild thing to do. I'm curious to see how they pull it off. Actually, I haven't played the game. It's like, oh, all right, like yeah, like this is it's a very like, in a weird way, risky Naughty Dog game. Especially because like Naughty Dog, for me, the way in which I kind of see them, like I've never really thought they made risky games. Like Naughty Dog in general is a studio that I love Naughty Dog, but they have a formula that they kind of stick to, and I think even in this game there are ways in which I'm like, this is obviously a Naughty Dog game, right? Like this plays like a Naughty Dog game. The ways in which the characters interact is very Naughty Dog. The way they have the banter back and forth and gameplay is very Naughty Dog. But like, yeah, once you actually play it, you kind of grow to realize that, like, oh yeah, they're like actually really breaking out of this, not necessarily breaking out of their formula, but taking risks in ways that feel really refreshing for a Naughty Dog game. And so like 2 to 3 weeks from now, where people actually, oh no, was that
he's doing good.
It's probably
rest in peace.
No,
he was like, I can't take the Discord.
Once he comes back, we should stop, because I feel like we're just like bursting with opinions already.
Oh yeah. I meant to ask, like, have we started yet? Because I was like, wait,
not in a sketch way, but I did already hit forward like a little bit after, just to like catch everything. But yeah, this is very informal. Like I said, I'll post it somewhere as long as people don't have strong feelings against that. Just because I think people do like. Oh, I'm like echoing.
Oh, hear me?
You're echoing.
Oh, hear me. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, I hear me.
Okay.
Too, though,
yeah.
Do you still hear you?
I hear an echo for you.
Okay, cool. It was an echo for a second.
Yeah,
just because the people that obviously do like our content and follow us, like I think there's a lot of people that, granted, there's only like a small number compared to driving crazy traffic, but I love making stuff that like people actually care about. And if someone wants to take the time to watch like whatever how many hours this is to find something to drag me over, I don't personally care. But that's basically what this is. I just kind of wanted a place for us to chat and have it be very informal and messy. One thing I, in a way, miss about, one of my friends, I did a show with them recently, and they were like, oh, what's the difference between doing, like, an IGN podcast and, like, the stuff you did before? And I'm like, a lot of it's the same kind of work, but there are certain shows where it's a lot more informal, and you can just kind of, it doesn't have to be this big, organized, nice production. Like, I think we all are really eloquent and have great takes, and I'm excited to learn more about how I feel about the game from talking to you guys. But I also just want us to have a place to just talk and have it be messy and disorganized and just be like, hey, I really want to just talk about this line for 3 minutes and just go off on it. And that's what I'm excited about. But
it's not like we can do that in articles or on Twitter.
Jump off of what you said. I totally agree. I mean, I think there's the cynical way to look at this game is, it's really not doing anything too special. We have a lot of dark stories and media. Like, what's the big deal? It's not as bold as it thinks it is. But I think in game franchises and also in certain types of movies, kind of if you think of the MCU and stuff, and this isn't to say there's low art and high art, because I think that's kind of a head-ass take, but there are certain kinds of people get really attached to certain characters, and killing them off is risky. It is bold. It's not in every single instance of every single medium, but in a game like this, I did not expect them to do it, and it took me a while to accept that Joel was dead. I was like, okay, how is he gonna get out of this one? And then I was like, okay, but what happened? And then it's we're at his grave, and I'm like, I guess he's dead. And I was really taken aback by that.
I think it was a really brave move to kill him off as starkly and as early in the narrative as they did. And I think more so than that, I think it was a really confident move to kill him off without having had Ellie and him have a visible on-screen confrontation yet about what he did at the end of the first game. And just jumping into it so much. I streamed the first couple of hours of this game once it was out to the public, and was just like, look, let's go through the first couple of hours, because I'm just really curious what people's impressions of that moment were going to be. And the overwhelming response to people seeing it blind was, oh no, I hate Abby. There is nothing this game could do to redeem her from this moment. And I think starting on that strong a foot of trying to get people to go, I cannot forgive this character, who the game's then going to work towards, let's get you to empathize and see that there's infinite parallels between her and Ellie's fucking narratives, was it's confident to start on that strong a foot and go, don't worry, we're going to work you up to understanding her.
I think, on top of that, there was such an incredible, I think they had to kill off Joel when they did, because I don't think anything less than killing off Joel would have felt real and strong enough a motivation for Ellie. Yeah. I think that it needed to be Joel, because we already had that attachment to Joel, right? So if it, if it was Dina, that would have been terrible because of the kill your queers trope and all that sort of stuff. And plus, we just didn't really know Dina. So, for me,
I was so confident that's what they were going to do.
I'm getting the marketing purposely.
Yeah, they did kind of really tease it that way too.
They did.
Well, the trailers didn't show Dina on the horse, and Dina is definitely on the horse. So like you think that. So they kind of Kojima this in the way Joel grabs you from behind is actually Jesse.
Yeah.
It's the same thing as a Fortune versus Snake fight back in the trailers back in 2000 or whatever. These were just misleading trailers.
And they had the first two trailers, or not even the first two trailers, but I'm gonna say the main two trailers were kind of the sway back and forth kind of thing, because when we got that first trailer where it was the reveal, I remember it was Ellie strumming the guitar, singing a song, and us finally being like, "Oh, okay, cool. This looks like The Last of Us." It was the Firefly logo on the stop sign, and we had Joel walk through the hallway into the house and into the room, and was like, I forget the exact line, but he says something along the lines of are we really going to do this? And you see Ellie look up, and she's like, I'm going to kill every last one of them, right? And that was the thing that made us go, okay, cool. This is what's happening. I think a lot of people were theorizing that, okay, is Joel a ghost? Did they kill Joel? What's going on? And that was kind of the thing that kind of set off that mode of thinking. It seemed to me
we all thought that Joel died back then.
Yeah, and it seemed to me the next trailer was a response to that, and was them going all right, we gotta throw him off the scent. And so when they did the state of play trailer for, I think it was last September, where it was, oh yeah, we're making it seem like Dina's the one who died, and that Joel is the one who pulled Ellie aside and was like, I'm going with you. And it seemed like they were very purposeful in that. I don't know how I necessarily feel about the way they marketed that, because on one side I get that you want people to have those surprises, and those you want people to have that threat of, all right, what's actually going to happen in this game? I don't know, because they're telling me two different things, or quite a few different things. Like, and who's also this Abby girl that we don't know her name's Abby yet, but like, who's this girl in the trailer where they're like clip her wings and all that stuff? Like, is that Ellie's mom? You want to kind of play around with the player a bit when it comes to the rollout to the game, but at the same time, I think that did lead so many of us to be like, all right, if they kill Dina, this character that we barely even know, who seems to be Ellie's girlfriend, and that's the thing that kind of like launches the story of this game, that is going to be Joel and Ellie again, then like that's kind of a weak thing that we've kind of seen over and over again in terms of how characters are treated, especially queer characters.
I wouldn't have cared about the narrative if that had been the motivation, because like, okay, what stories have we had in this series about Ellie being gay? We've had, she's in love, she's on her first date, and oops, it ended tragically and she's dead. Okay, we'll have another game where she's the protagonist, she's in love, she's dead. Like, that's just not interesting.
Yeah, and it's not. And who else would it have been? That's the thing. You know, Joel provided the necessary motivation. We were all behind Ellie seeking out revenge because we loved Joel. And I think one of the most incredible things, well, I mean, a lot.
I love Joel.
I didn't love Joel, which is why The Last of Us 1 didn't work for me. But I think the writing is so nuanced that even if you didn't like Joel, you have a stake in it, because you realize what Ellie lost, which is that she was violently robbed of the chance to have a conclusion with him, to make amends with him. And I think we all know that feeling of wanting conclusion with someone and not getting that opportunity. And I think that, like, it doesn't rely just on you liking Joel. The writing is so nuanced and complex that it relies on something that's so universal. That's what makes it so good.
Yeah, I think
that's a good point.
Because of how Ellie felt about Joel and what she needed from Joel. Exactly.
And I know this is...
sorry, go for it. That's all you.
And I know this is like jumping ahead a chunk, but I do love that we got those flashbacks later on that fleshed out like what led up to his death, because like the one that really sticks in my mind is that really last cutscene where it's the night before Joel dies, and she's like, I don't know if I can ever forgive you, but I want to try. And like that's such a heartbreaking backdrop to that, is like, you have unforgivably like taken my reason for living. You've taken my life's purpose away from me, and I'm going to try and forgive you, and oops, you're gone.
I just watched that scene 30 minutes ago, and I was drying my eyes before I logged on.
You just read it off. I'm just like, I'm too emotional. Yeah. Also, what killed me in that scene, and I love that. One thing I love about the writing of this game, even more so than the first, because to me, the first, it had good writing, but like it was the end that was really like, oh, this was really beautifully. Also, it was beautifully performed. If the way Ellie says okay, it's like the perfect ambiguity. But like with that scene that you're talking about, Laura, like for me, it was what really killed me there is when Joel said, you know, if I could, I'm getting on Misty, if I could do it over, I would do it again.
I would do it all right. I was gonna say.
And I was like, wow, like, you know, as much as I disagreed with what Joel's decision was at the end of the first game, I was like, and maybe, you know, you can say, I think love is selfish in a lot of ways, and that's another kind of underlying theme of like the game besides like revenge was bad. Like, I think there's a lot more interesting things underneath that. I thought it was so bold for him to be like, this decision may make you like hate me to the point where we don't have a relationship, but if you're alive, like the fact that you're there, oh my god, I'm getting like so emotional just talking about it. I think it's so beautiful. Like I love the irrationality and the emotion behind that, and like that was like that like scene absolutely floored me. And I like that this game made me someone that hated Joel's decision at the end of the first game. It made me care about Joel. Like when he died, I was like, okay, no, but he can't, you know, it's like, because I cared about, you know, the relationship playing out and seeing that. And I think I like that this game and this series now can make you feel so many different ways about a character. And that's really like reflective of how we feel about other people in real life.
Let's talk about Joel for a second, because like...
Have we started?
Well, I just, let's touch on Joel just for a second, because like, I think it's important that, because a lot of the discourse I'm seeing around this game, and I don't want to like touch on, you know, the discourse too much because I want to hear our opinions, you know, this is what this podcast is for. But like a lot of the chatter is about how the Last of Us Part 2 disrespects Joel, you know, it does him dirty. He's killed in a really brutal way, in a really sort of messy way really early on. And I think a lot of people, you know, I saw one guy today on Twitter just being like, I put the game down, like I don't give a shit anymore, that's my main guy, he's dead. But like I just want to say that the game goes out of its way to respect Joel, to like to give
flowers
Joel,
outside his house.
Yes, to paint Joel as a nuanced character who's, I mean, all the flashbacks, your heart was breaking for this guy, and he was a shitty guy in his life. He was, he was a great guy. He was a shitty guy. He was a person, and I think that the game did a really good job at showing you that. And it's important to sort of stress that this game does respect Joel a lot.
I don't know if everyone here.
If people want like a platoon like death for like Joel, where it's like grandiose or like something like the way like Altair in Assassin's Creed dies or whatever,
Yeah.
like you just die nobly in your chair and you're like, like that's what they want,
Yeah.
He's an interesting character because like he's done shitty things. You've seen enough to empathize with why he's done those shitty things. You've got enough people around him to go like, look, I am horrified by the thing you did to me, and he's there to go, I see that you're horrified, still gonna stick with it. He's very like stuck to his guns on that front. And I think like I think the game justifies really well why he had to die so brutally, because it's like it's very easy for us to empathize with him because we've been on this like 20-hour journey with him in the first game. It's very easy to go, I understand the road he took to get here. But if you stop and look at it for just a few seconds from the other side and go, he murdered countless innocent people for a selfish reason. He denied Ellie and he denied the world a cure. Like, he did a lot of things that, like, I think if you hadn't seen Joel's story in the first Last of Us and went, there's a man who murdered a bunch of people to selfishly, to take someone. These are innocent people. He denied the world a cure to a zombie outbreak. Can you understand why someone would beat him with a golf club? And it's like, yeah, of course you can. It makes sense. If
even as a father figure, he overstepped his boundaries in determining Ellie's fate, and you see it in the beginning. Even this is what I caught on when he was giving the guitar to Ellie. Ellie didn't seem sure whether she would be down with this, whether she would be ready to accept it. But you can see in her face and in her eyes. And to your point, Janet earlier about the acting in the story, people say that the storytelling is shitty because they don't agree with the writing. But then the storytelling animation is part of the storytelling. The way Tommy's face is looking at Joel with horror and compassion when he hears what he did, and the way that Ellie's confusion when she gets the guitar, like, what do I do with this? Like I'm still really mad at this guy, and I don't know if I trust him. But he clearly fucking loves me,
Yeah, I think that song in the beginning that he sings, "If I Ever Were to Lose You," I think is such a good, such a perfect way to kind of establish Joel's character toward the beginning and establish like the connective thread between his connection to Ellie, why he did what he did for Ellie, and that same song I think kind of flows throughout the themes of the whole game, right? Like the whole game is about loss and is about the hate that can kind of stem from that, or the revenge that you want to take, because of that, right? And so every single act of hate or act of revenge that takes place in this game is because of some kind of loss. And so Ellie loses Joel, Ellie goes after Abby, right? Like Abby loses, I always forget their names, but Owen and I think Mel is the
Mel.
She didn't mind that Mel died. Let's be real. She was
she didn't really care about Mel. She was like, you know what, man? 1 point to Ellie.
Abby's like, you'll die.
Because Tommy kills Manny too, and Manny was her best friend.
Yeah.
So she also cares about that.
But that's such a good song to start the game off with, and that song I know repeats throughout the game, and I think they do such a good job of bringing that song up over and over again in all the right times. But even
jam too.
To the point of Joel's character, right? In the first Last of Us, I feel like our first introduction to Joel is Joel as a good guy, Joel as this dude who, for us as the player, right? Him being the main character, we're like, all right, yeah, this guy seems cool. This guy has had this connection to Sarah, lost Sarah, of course, and so he's a smuggler now. All right, I get that. But I think toward the winter chapters and toward the later chapters, that's when we start to see not necessarily his true character, because I think his true character was there all along, but we start to see the moral gray in which this world kind of takes place and the things you do because this is what the world has become, right? In the winter chapter, and this is the thing that they bring up again in Last of Us Part 2, which I think they do such a good job of. In that winter chapter, when he wakes up and he's looking for Ellie because he knows something's wrong, and he finds those two hunters and he's like, all right, guy. Like, he has one of them tied up, and I think one of them against the wall, and he's like, all right, where's the girl? Or where is she? And has one of them points to where she's at on the map, and then is like, all right, if he doesn't tell me the same place, you guys are dead, right? And like he gets that first one, and he's like, all right, yeah, cool, and then kills him, and the guy's like, wait, you don't even know if he's telling the truth, and he's like, I believe him, and kills the second one, right? Like that's a very good example of Joel being this dude who is pretty much like a bad guy, right? Like those hunters didn't necessarily do anything that you can make the argument that those hunters are bad because they're bad, but overall, like that is kind of an eye for an eye kind of moment of, hey, like in this situation, like we are just people, and I am here to get back my person, and you guys are just obstacles for me. And that then feeds through the end of the game.
You see his ability to dehumanize other people.
Exactly. Yeah.
And one thing I think this game does really well in how it initially sets Abby up to be or perceived as the villain before it sort of works through that is it really seems to get the idea that it's much easier to empathize with someone if you've seen their journey. And honestly, that's the only thing that's different when we see Abby kill Joel is we've not seen her journey. We've not seen the hurt that led her there, which makes it so much easier to dismiss her actions as needlessly violent, needlessly excessive, needlessly vengeance-driven. But it's like, when you look at it like from the end of the game, Abby went on a mission to kill Joel and only killed Joel. You look at any of the other vengeance missions that happened in this series, and every one of them has countless collateral along the way. It's,
Yeah, and even in that scene where she kills Joel, right? Like you can tell that there's some conflict going on because somebody is like, all right, well, we got to kill these two also, but then somebody's like, no, we're just here for him. We got to leave these guys alone. Like they didn't do anything.
Like, she's actively there. Like, no, we're not just going to kill people because they're attached to the person that we're trying to kill, and that's in such stark contrast to Ellie, who is like, every one of you was in that room. I'm going to kill every one of you as well as her.
Yeah,
it's such a different way of thinking.
This is our discussion. Oh, go on.
Well, I was gonna wrap up the Joel thing because I think I think in terms of what Lucy was saying in terms of people's talking about how the game doesn't necessarily respect Joel as much, right? Like in terms of performance, I'd say Joel's character had, for me, my favorite performance in the game. In terms of like voice acting or just performance in general, right? Like when we get that beginning scene of him walking into Ellie's room and it's like, hey, like I got a joke, that I want to tell you. I forget the exact exchange, but him trying to tell Ellie this joke, turning into him singing the song, and you can kind of see, like, you can kind of hear the shake in his voice. You can kind of tell that he's emotional in that moment. I think they do such a good job of establishing his character coming off of the first game, and I think, that loss of Joel, when we finally get there to where they finally take Joel away from us, I think it serves as not just a good motivator for Ellie, but a good motivator for us as a player, as a character that we care about, as a character that we have a connection to, right? Like even whether or not you liked him in the first game, I think even in the beginning hours of the second game, I think by then you at least have this idea of like, oh yeah, like, Joel is a character that I've spent time with. Joel is a character that I have this connection to, and so to have him ripped from us, I think, for the game's overall narrative of loss and revenge based on loss and like even love, like Natalie wrote about in a review, like I think that moment where they take Joel away from us, the player, that then serves as such a good catalyst for both us and Ellie to feel like, all right, cool, this is justified. Me and Ellie are gonna go out and we're gonna take down Abby and the crew.
And I don't know if you guys felt the same way, but for me, I didn't really feel the weight of Joel's death until the very, very end, right before the credits rolled.
Yeah.
Because the way that The Last of Us Part 2 uses flashbacks, the way that Joel always kind of feels like he's there, there's so much of Joel in this game. And then when Ellie is finally able to sort of let him go, which only happens at the very end, that's when I suddenly kind of felt like he was gone. That's what it felt like to me.
I think you were going to jump in and say something if you had anything about the Joel thing or anything else.
Me, yeah. So two things. One, on the Joel thing, I super recommend Julie Muncie's review over at The Wired, if anyone else has read it, in which she argues about how, because it's so weird that people have the notion that this game lacks Joel because she makes the argument that there's this new subgenre of games emerging called the daughter games, in which you can't really stray too far away from the dad games because they're a response to the dad games. And so if The Last of Us 2 were to have just killed off Joel and not had consistent flashbacks throughout the entire game, that would have deviated too much from the dad game that people wanted out of The Last of Us, and thus it would have been uncomfortable for a lot of people just to be invested in stories about women and their own rage and their love and their hate and their revenge. So that's one thing. That article is super good. I think it's my favorite review out of all the ones for The Last of Us 2. And the second thing is that this entire discussion makes me think about this notion that's going around that I really disagree with, which is there are people who understand what Joel did in the first game, but they really object to what Ellie and Abby do in this game. And I find that I'm interested to hear everyone else's opinions on that, because I feel like if you understand Joel in the first game, you have to understand Ellie here too, because what Joel did in the first game isn't any less violent. You don't see him bash people and, kill them and murder them relentlessly like you see with Ellie, but he did doom all of humanity just for this one person. He did kill basically all of humanity and doom them to the continuation of this virus.
Anyway, Laura, you were looking at something.
I was going to say, I think there's a key difference why people feel differently about the violence in this game compared to the first game, and it's because women are doing the violence, because there is a certain expectation that seeing men do violence is expected and seeing women do violence is in some way shocking. It's in some way considered more intense or more, vicious because it's not portrayed as frequently in media.
Like that scene where Ellie is in the theater and Dina comes to heal her wounds and you see her back just mangled and scars and injuries. That felt so quietly revolutionary for me, because women don't get the opportunity to do that. If we're, fighting and we're doing really badass things, it's always like a Wonder Woman-esque type of thing where we're elevated into grace and in this sort of image that people still find us desirable in spite of the violence that we're enacting. But Ellie is not that, and Abby is not that either. Abby is out there with her buff arms, just bashing the shit out of people, and it doesn't exist for the fetishization of predominantly straight men.
I love how, I think a lot of us playing probably did this, or maybe I'm just weird, but you have to turn the camera when you get a few of those stealth kills, right? Like we've all hit that rotation or gone to photo mode, and I love how, and I mean this in the most not janky way, how gross Ellie's face looks sometimes, because that's how she would look, and it's not even just a solely a feminist issue, but it's realistic. It is how women look, and I like that there are moments where, Ellie gets to take on the role that Joel would have taken on. Like, she has that, when she's running into the tunnels and she moves the vending machine, I'm like, ain't no person able to move a vending machine, but she's in a game, so she can. And I like that she gets to have that. And I really love, too, how, in terms of game mechanics, they lean into kind of the build and style of the characters. Ellie's scrappy and secretive, and versus Abby, if you can't shoot, man, you get into that second half and you're literally boxing out with clickers, and it doesn't matter. And I love that. I like how they lean into that and play that up and let women do stuff that they wouldn't normally do in games or be depicted that way. And it's not meant to be pretty. It feels like it normalizes, I guess, the existence of women in that sense, because it's like, oh, this female character is just as obscenely strong as this random male character, because it's a video game, and I really like that about it.
Dude, Abby is a machine in the game in a way that we should talk about Abby's character, because I feel like Abby's character is the biggest key in this whole thing in terms of just the biggest wrench thrown in what I think all expected this game to be and what it actually ended up being. I said this in our own Spoilercast that we did for Kind of Funny, and I'm gonna repeat it here. I think I liked Abby's character more than Ellie's character.
Me too.
By the time I finished the game, I felt I connected with Abby's arc more so than Ellie's arc. I felt more aligned with Abby's motivations than Ellie's motivations. Like with Ellie's journey, there was a certain point where I was like, and I think most of us probably had this reaction, or at least I did, to where at a certain point later on, I was like, all right, Ellie, we gotta stop this. This is enough is enough. This has gone too far. Ellie,
we're going
please stop.
to the resort. I'm like, are we?
Yeah, I was like, are we really going to Santa Barbara right now? Like, do we really?
I was like, I don't know. I was like hunched over playing that in Ellie part. I was like, stop, just stop.
When
Please
she
stop.
leaves,
Please
when
don't make
she
me
leaves
do
Dina
this.
crying in that kitchen, I was like, bitch, you are just ruining,
Laura,
just
go
like.
for it.
Yeah.
There's a moment where she's herding sheep, and I'm just like, just end the game here. Let
Yeah.
her
I
have
thought end there, and there's so many fake out endings. I was like, oh my god, this is my Uncharted 4, The Last of Us ending. Yes. Oh my god.
So I'll be
Yeah,
that.
and then it kept going, and it's like, no,
here.
no, please stop.
I'll be the outlier here and said that I related to Ellie more, and during the last fight, I was still mashing square, even when the
Dude,
game told me not to.
I felt so bad about that. I
and-
died twice during that
feel
Matthew Square moment because I
awful,
couldn't do it.
Like in the theater fight, I don't know how many times I died because I was like, oh, Ellie, let me hear you. Oh my god, no. And then she just shoved a machete in my gut, and I was like, oh no.
Dude, there were quite a few times where I
time.
was like, man, it'd be a shame if Abby
was
won
hard.
this
She was
fight, and
hard.
I just put down the controller.
Yeah, like I don't know who I related to / cared about more by the end. I definitely wasn't a fan of Ellie's ultimate choice, and I think it's, and I don't even know what thought I have on this comment that I'm about to say, which is maybe I shouldn't make it, but I think it's interesting what like they do with parenthood in this game. You know, think of that whole like dad game genre, because both Ellie and Abby end up being parents. Ellie to a more severe degree in the sense that she's with Dina, and Dina has a kid, and that's her kid ostensibly. But Abby takes on the role of she's Joel from the first game, you know, with Lev. And I think that's really an interesting callback as well, and kind of like, oh, violence is always justified when you have a kid, but like Abby's violence is like trying to take Lev into like a different world and into a world of safety and also acceptance, because there's obviously it's very charged to Lev being a trans kid and being ostracized from their community from his community because of that. Versus like the pain that I felt, and I messaged Natalie about this when Dina says she doesn't get to be more important than our family. Oh, yes. I'm dead. I can't handle it. It was so, once again, the writing here is just so beautiful, because like it really does twist the knife and like hits you hard, because it just feels so relatable and real. And I think that's kind of the difference between Ellie's and Abby's violence. Abby's towards the end feels like, I'm looking out for Lev, I got attached to Lev, and I'm now Joel. This the remix, right? I'm now Joel, and this is my Ellie, basically. So yeah.
They're both in such an interesting place, and I think part of it is, I think when we're talking about the overarching things of The Last of Us Part 2 and that arc of, all right, like I've been wronged, I need to get revenge. All right, I've gotten revenge. All right, where do we go from here? Like to give credit to Ellie in terms of where she's at comparatively with Abby. Abby's at the point where she's already gotten revenge. Like Abby's already gotten to the point where she was able to indulge in that and then go back home, and for all intents and purposes seems like she's still not fulfilled. Right? And I think that's why we see that turn with her and that arc with her and Lev and Yara, because Abby's been there and come back and now has to deal with, all right, I'm back now. How do I feel? What do I do? And so I think when we get that story with her, Yara, and Lev, like, you know, it feels like she's further along in that line than Ellie is, because Ellie is starting from, all right, y'all killed Joel. I'm on a journey now. I'm gonna kill you guys.
Absolutely right, but we also like I need to acknowledge that Abby does get revenge, but then she has she has a secondary motivation for revenge, which is that Ellie kills Owen. And that is a massive motivation for her to get revenge. And she decides to let Ellie go, because at this point she has grown enough as a character. She has grown enough to recognize the cycle of violence that she's in, and she wants to break out of that. I think that...
Can I very quickly on that tack on? Yeah, I just wanted to tack on that moment. I think it's also really important to note that Lev is such a big part of that decision for her not to enact that second revenge.
Yep.
Yeah.
It is one thing that I
that
really
was the
like
only
about
reason I would say.
Yeah. Go ahead,
it's one thing I really like about Lev's inclusion as a trans character is that he is a moral center in that moment. He is the reason that she's able to get pulled back from that edge. And, you know, maybe part of it is she's had revenge before. She knows how much or how little it will actually change how she feels. She's got that reference point. But a lot of it is Lev there being like, you don't have to do this. You can just get on with your life.
That's very fair.
But
it's just such a shame JJ wasn't enough of an anchor for Ellie to Calm the farm.
It's interesting too because there's like, and I once again I don't know what the overarching like what a really nice take on this would be or an interesting take. There's an article here, but I'm not gonna write it because I can't figure it out. There's something interesting going on with I think Parenthood though, right? Because when is Ellie only horrified? When she realizes that Mel was pregnant? When does Lev actually step in and say no? When she's about to kill Dina and Dina's pregnant? Like basically, if you don't have a kid, like anyone can catch these hands. That's what this game has taught me. But like I do think also on that note, it was such a bad, even though she didn't end up killing her, it was such a badass line when Ellie goes, she's pregnant, and Abby says, good? I'm like, ooh, I don't want you to kill her, but if you slit her throat, I would not be mad, because it is so well written.
When
like,
Ellie was like, she's pregnant, I was like, bitch, you're just going to encourage her. Like, that's just more ammunition for her.
Yeah.
I think to your point, Janet, about like where they highlight, obviously it's parallels to be like, hey, look, it's the same on different sides, because they parallel so much between those fucking narratives. But I think a big part of it is a child that is growing in a pregnant person is definitively, everyone can see, is innocent. Like they are not part of your revenge narrative.
And part of the cycle of revenge.
Yeah, exactly.
But for Ellie, when she's, she can kill all these people and justify it as, well, you're in the evil group, you're in the evil group, you're the villain, you're the villain. As soon as you kill someone that's pregnant, you're like, I've taken at least one innocent life here, and you have to stop and re-examine some element of what you've done. And again, it's why that line about she's pregnant, good, is so strong, is because it's like, oh, that is signifying that you are making a conscious choice to kill someone innocent to make a point.
Yeah,
like
how far are you going to take that cycle of revenge? Because it's just going to keep going on and on.
Yeah, I think to the point of Lev's involvement in Abby's change and Abby's decision. I think part of that also comes to who Yara and Lev are, and like who their people are, and what that faction is as the Scars, right? Like we through Abby's journey, we get more information about the Wolves versus the Scars, and what that back and forth looks like, and what essentially like the hate between those two factions looks like, and the back and forth revenge that those factions are getting on each other, to the point where they went from being at peace to now at war because of whatever reason.
And that children were involved in that too, as well, which is like an interesting kind of thing going on.
But I do like about go on, sorry.
Well, I was just say they do such a good job through the introduction of Yara and Lev of building those connections between them and Abby, to where I think to me that was like the connecting thing that made Abby go like, all right, like these are people from a group I hate, but like I love these people, and I think that is part of that part of Abby's arc. I think kind of made her open up in a way that allowed for that change, that allowed for that moment with Dina.
Nat, what were you gonna say?
What struck me about Abby's part is that she was oblivious to Ellie's actions the whole time until day 3. She was just on her own journey. She was on her own thing, and Tommy was wreaking havoc, and Ellie was killing all of her friends. And it wasn't until the very end when she faced Tommy and then just realized like maybe something else is going on, and then Ellie was there, and it was just like it just shows like how much the different perspectives was. Ellie was just so laser focused on Abby. And when I started playing as Ellie, like I started thinking, oh, this is a Far Cry game, and I'm going to the war zone to take out the commanders. I take out Leia, I take out Jordan, I take out Nora, and then I'm gonna get to the commander Abby. And that's not what it was like at all. It was a shit show on her end too.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on that.
No, go on. Because I think you were really like trying to jump in. So.
Just a very quick parallel before I forget it is, I find it really interesting that Abby has this whole motivation with Yara and Lev that's about, I feel an obligation to make sure you're okay because you saved my life. You did an altruistic thing to save me, and you didn't have to do that. And I find that an interesting parallel to Joel and Tommy saved her and did an altruistic act and saved her life, and she didn't feel that same need to, repay the favor with them. And I don't know if I have anything interesting to note about that, other than that I really like that pair of things.
Yeah.
What's up, Natalie?
Yeah. So what I wanted to talk about was the whole Seraphites versus the WLF thing, because One thing that I think the thing that I was most wary of going into this game, besides the whole bury your gaze trope that the marketing fell into, was that when you have a story about warring factions, it so easily veers into territory of forgiving oppressors, and it really rings differently if you're a person of color, because especially in this day and age where you have this narrative that's like, I know there's like good people on both sides, and you have to recognize that, and blah blah blah. And so, but what I think makes it work so well here is that, and going back to Lev represents what the system is in a non-bastardized version, because Lev makes the point of showing like it is not the fault of the religion that we follow. It is the fault of the people who are carrying out this religion, bastardizing it, and deciding to murder and use it for their own gains. Similarly, I think that it avoids falling into this really problematic narrative of both sides have merit, just because Abby and Lev both leave their respective systems. Like, Lev leaves the Seraphites, Abby is kicked out of the WLF, and you can see that so powerfully. And the line that gets me, one of the lines that got me the most is after Yara is killed, and Lev looks at his hands that are stained with blood, and he's like she's dead, like she's gone, and your people did this, and she immediately goes, "No, those are not my people. You're my people," and
Yes.
that's just so. It's such a powerful moment.
There's another moment that really rang true. Is exactly what you're saying. That was when she reunites with Manny, and Manny's like, there have been these trespassers that have been following us for days. They've really got it up for us, etc., etc. And you know, her rhetoric, Abby's rhetoric before that point had been, if they shoot first, it's not our fault. You know, very much like the cycle of violence. Like we're not the ones at fault. Like if they, and she says, she asks why. Like she asks Manny why. Like and for me, the fact that she asked that question, like you'd already seen that she was not thinking inside this faction anymore. She was actually questioning her place in the world and her place in this tribe that she'd sort of been ascribed to. And I just found that like it was a very small moment, but it really stayed with me. Just the fact that she questioned it for the first time.
And Natalie, and also Lucy, to your point too, what I love so much about Lev throughout his journey is that he was still quoting Seraphite scripture.
Yes.
He still, despite rejection and ostracization from his community, he still found like solace and comfort in what he knew. And to your point, Natalie, it wasn't the religion that did that to him. It was the warping of whatever teachings that person, and we don't really know a lot about her there, but something happened where Lev was a victim in that system that he's trying to break through.
It makes such interesting parallels to queerness and religion in real life, because like, I mean, what's to say that a specific religion like hates queer people and trans people? Like, what about the people who have translated the Bible throughout the years and decided to change the meaning? And what about the people who use the Bible in order to oppress and, perpetuate systematic homophobia and queerphobia? It's like, yeah, like if we're going by the idea that God created everyone, and I'm not religious, but if we're going by the idea that God created everyone, in equal measure and to be who they were meant to be, then like queer, trans people, bi people, gay people are who we are meant to be, and Lev represents that so beautifully. And so for a game that is so violent, I am just continuously, even on my second playthrough, I'm amazed by the grace that it uses with its themes. It is so graceful with its representation.
I did want to talk a little bit about Lev while we're talking about him, just because there are some things about his presentation that they're not necessarily big things, but they're things I kind of want to address. First of all, I get why they had the interaction when you're fighting those cult members and they throw out Lev's dead name as a way to go, this is shorthand to tell you this character is trans. And sure, Abby's response is really good. It's like, hey, I'm not expecting you to talk about what was going on there if you don't want to. I will. You are Lev. That's all I need to know. But like, no narrative needs to do that. It's a lazy shorthand to get around. And as a trans person playing, I always find it really cheap and tacky when a game will throw out a dead name just to go, we did it because they're trans. Like, there are lots of games that have done this to various bad degrees. The one I always think of is Mass Effect Andromeda, where there was a trans character. I think they've been patched now. Where
they're like, willingly gives away her like dead name or something, right?
I traveled halfway across the galaxy to avoid getting called by my dead name. Which is this?
Oh,
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But, like, that's a thing with Lev, and like there are valid criticisms to be made of Lev's narrative centers around transness because he's very recently out. It's used as a tool to sort of talk about the some of the bigoted beliefs that exist within the Seraphites, and like it exists for a purpose. It does do something within the narrative, but you know it is uncomfortable in places, and I think they took some weird shorthands that aren't always what I would like. If I was going to consult on something like this, I would say that's not maybe the best way to go about handling a trans character. But on the whole, I'm glad that he got to get out alive. Like much with all the LGBT characters, I'm glad that they didn't introduce him to kill him off. I am glad that he got to talk through his feelings, that he got to be accepted by his sister, that he was all of the player characters and their surrounding groups all respected his identity and name. Like, there's a lot they got right. And I think, like, I don't know, I'm still unpacking how I feel about a lot of stuff around Lev's character, but I think he is a funny, insightful, confident, skilled character who is a delight to have in the narrative, and I'm glad he's there. But yeah,
no, Laura, I think that's very valid, and I do want to just quickly touch on representation of perhaps minorities or character types that we don't usually see in AAA games. So for me, as a gay woman, cis gay woman, I found Ellie and Ellie's gayness very, very authentic and real. Yeah. Dina as a bisexual woman. I found their relationship very, very believable. I thought it was very respectful. It wasn't a big deal, which I adored. It was very natural and organic. But like, I know that wasn't true of every single kind of sort of minority character in this game. So Janet, I'd love you to touch on your thoughts on Manny.
Yeah, sure. I was about to ask Janet, what did you think of Manny? Because I wrote in my review that I did not like.
I did read it, yeah. And also, Laura / everyone, remind me to ask you a question because I have a question about more on your take on Lev and how his representation was handled. But just to address the Manny thing.
Laura's handling it. She's writing it down.
When Manny was first introduced, I thought, okay, this is like, I'm chill with it. This is very early, right when Joel was murdered. Because like the only thing Manny says in Spanish is like "puta madre," which is a very like, and I now especially I watched part of my boyfriend's playthrough, so I also watched myself play the game when I was writing the guide, but it was at like 300x speed, which is also hilarious to watch because everything's squeaky and fast. But he's from Mexico, like they state that early on. Like now that I'm re-looking at it, I get so much more though too, like. Watching at least another playthrough, if you don't want to play it again, you pick up on so much more. I'm like, oh, they were teasing all this from the beginning. Like, even Abby's Fear of Heights, which I love. But back to Manny for a second. I thought that example was very authentic. But then when I actually hung out with Manny one-on-one, I thought it did lean too much into kind of, Natalie, a lot of stuff that you've talked about on Twitter and in your review, where it's ambiguous, like, Spanish accent. Obviously, he's supposed to be Mexican, so I'll take that at face value. But he just randomly says Spanish words in times where it doesn't make any sense. Like, he'll just randomly say, sí, even though, like, no one would say that. Like, no one's ever said that.
Abby, can you get me something con picante? And I'm like, this white bitch does not know what con picante means. Yeah, like, she doesn't.
And he has moments, like...
Yeah, I don't
like
just drop Korean, like, out of nowhere, too.
Exactly.
Like if I'm just talking to my white girlfriend, you know?
I do like some of his...
That's not authentic. That's true.
I like some of his jokes with that, though. I think there are moments where he is well written. Like, I love when Abby's calling him out and he says, no hablo inglés. Like, I think that's cute. It's cheeky. Yeah. It's kind of nodding to, like, we're different. You're, like, part of, like, white culture, and I'm, like, he's literally from Mexico, so, like, that now explains the accent and all that. But, yeah, like, it felt very much like they felt the need to emphasize that he was Mexican when they really didn't need to. They kind of just let him, like, let him be, and especially because he's not someone that... He is clearly fluent in English, so someone fluent in English would not dip into Spanish for those specific reasons. For swears, interjections, like, of course, but Yeah, the other elements did feel kind of like.
If you're around other people who
Why?
speak Spanish, because if I was in a group of people who did not speak Spanish, I would not start going like pendejo or like ay cabrón or something like that. Like that's just like why would I say that when nobody else gets what I'm trying to
Exactly. And then when
communicate?
Abby like says it
Yeah.
after the shooting range, I'm like,
Yeah, it's like I guess you could think of something from because they're like super close best friends, but for me it was because I get he's Mexican, but for me it's why it's like why is this one single character othered
yeah.
in a way that no other character is? Why
I
is a
think-
single person from Mexico and not a Mexican
Doesn't have to
American?
be from Mexico. He could just
Exactly.
be Mexican American.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Doesn't
and
have to be
the
from
friend is from Cuba. She came here when she was like older than 5 years old. She has an American as hell accent. Like she
Exactly.
sounds like very white, and it's like
Jesse,
you can come at
Jesse,
yeah,
Jesse doesn't have an accent, you know, and he's Asian as hell, you know.
yeah,
Exactly.
But
exactly.
And I like
talk
with
like
you know
Jesse,
his Jesse's joke too, and like this kind of is like both race and queerness, which I absolutely loved. Where Jesse
I
makes
did
that
like
joke
his
in the
Asian.
bookstore,
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
he was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, like you don't like me because I'm Asian, right?" And Ellie's like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, that's it." And you can tell that like they're friendly in a way where they can like touch on
Yeah.
social issues
Yeah.
without
Yeah.
feeling like it's an uncomfortable moment. And I felt like that was very authentic to people that like you know. I think even on this call, right, we all have different backgrounds and experiences, and we can kind of like make those jokes because if we know each other and are comfortable, and I love that as an example. But yeah, Manny was hit or miss, mostly miss, but he had his moments. But yeah, it did fall into that trope a bit. Laura, I really am curious to know, and I feel like you probably have thought about this like a bit after you've written a lot of articles and things and had plenty of discussions. But what would you feel like is an ethical way to note transness in games? Like what does that representation look like to you? Or if it's easier, is there a game that has done that where you're like, they did this way and I really appreciate it because of XYZ?
For this game in particular, I think that you very, very easily could have sidestepped this by just focusing on the cut hair thing, because I think that is a big enough thing up front. Is they talk about, I shaved my hair and I got kicked out of the religion.
Yeah.
Abby asks back, why was that enough to get you kicked out? And that opens up a room to go, like, this is my background. I'm supposed to have long hair and I cut it. And that's going to be enough for most people who have even, like, a little bit of ability to think, to go, I
They
see
still
what's
could
going
have
on.
had that good line from Abby. You could still write that good line from Abby in with that same scenario.
Exactly. And then you open it up for that conversation with Yara later, where it's like, hey, can you give me a bit more information about what's going on with Lev being kicked out just for cutting his hair? And that opens up the room for Yara to go, hey, so Lev, does not identify the way that they were born, and I found that difficult to understand because religious upbringing. But Lev explained to me how he felt inside, and I understood it, and we had to get out. Like, you don't have to hit on dead naming and misgendering. Both of them are shortcuts to get to that point, rather than just letting people go like, okay, I can make that little logical leap. The other thing I wanted to say, and I forgot to say this the first time round about Lev, is I think why the violence against Lev feels a bit different to me than the violence against, say, Ellie or Dina, in terms of LGBT violence, is Lev's trauma and suffering that he goes through in this narrative is not part of the wider theme of revenge begets revenge begets revenge. Because when we see any other LGBT character in this game go through violent situations, it's because someone did violence first, and that's revenge for that, and that's revenge for that, and it's not because of the fact they're LGBT, it's violence because they did something violent that got someone else to do something violent to them. Lev's violence is for existing as an LGBT character, and that hits differently. It's violence that doesn't fit into the game's themes of why violence exists. It stands out from every other violent interaction I can think of in the game, and there's something to unpack there.
Yeah.
I loved Liv. I loved Liv as a character. I found him so funny. And I know that they played Abby and Liv's relationship was so playful, and I really loved that. Some of the lightest moments in the latter half of this game came from the kind of lightness in their duo. You know, that moment when Abby said something like, you know, I always bring up when you're wrong because you so rarely are. And I loved that as a little moment, and how sort of deadpan Lev is about everything. It was just I loved him. I loved him so much. And you know, I totally understood why Abby wanted to protect him and get him out of this life. I so got that. And again, that made that ending so much more horrific to play through, because
oh god,
because when Ellie cuts her down, the first thing that she says is Lev. She's not even thinking about herself. She's just thinking Lev, and it's so.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting too. She didn't know, like it, you know, like Lucy, you're like, oh, you know, Lev's so funny and like charming and like they have a good rapport, but like much like I think in so many ways Lev is Ellie from the first game, and it's like overwhelming. The only difference is, you know, in this case, like Lev was associated with Abby still living and kind of fleeing from the situation, versus like Ellie was just kind of like thrust upon Joel. And I think too, like, you know, I forgot who mentioned it here, but like talking about Joel's arc, and I think it was Blessing kind of talking about like, oh, Joel was cool, and then he like wasn't, and then he was again, and like we kind of see his personality and who he truly is. But like who Joel truly is a smuggler and kind of someone who's like sort of morally jank. And Joel is that up until Tess is like, you need to do this. You have to feel some obligation to me after all this time, which, another line that floors me. Not that many from The Last of Us 1, admittedly, that floored me, but that one was really good. And Abby also gains, like, the same obligation, but for a different reason. Like, no one tells Abby that, like, you need to do this, but Abby feels it. I think also, like, it's interesting, too, seeing how Abby is both, like, upfrontly and like inadvertently influenced by Owen's characteristic, and seeing what Owen like everything that Owen does is kind of, she sort of like filters humanity through Owen in some ways. Like even just knowing that he rebelled and seeing that happen, it kind of like gives her, I think in some ways, like the freedom to do that. Not that she wouldn't do it otherwise, but I think it definitely has an influence, like their relationship and their dynamic. But yeah, it was interesting to see Abby kind of become this better person through nurturing this child, the same way Joel eventually, you know, in the middle of the game, Joel, like, I was so mad at Joel when he was like, Ellie, like in the first game, when he was like, he wanted to pawn Ellie off on, like, whoever just to kind of get rid of it and everything. And he's like, and he told Ellie point blank, you are not my daughter. Like, come on. I'm like, this guy is trash. But then he, you know, he suddenly loves her and builds that relationship. And they go through that whole thing during winter, and it kind of evolves it. It's interesting in contrast to, like, right away, Abby and Lev, like it's just kind of an immediate kinship. And also, Laura, I know you want to jump in, but Blessing, I'm curious as to what you think about Lev in this game and how the role he plays and what he did for your experience as a player.
Yeah, Lev is definitely one of my favorite characters. Like, I absolutely loved Lev. Also, Yara. I want to give a shout out to Yara because I think
yes,
she
Yara,
a great older sister to Lev.
Yeah.
Actually, I want to flip this back on you guys, because the thing that I've been kind of theorizing and kind of been thinking about a bit, if they do end up making Last of Us Part 3, do you think we play as Lev? Because that is my theory. I think we play as Lev in Last of Us Part 3.
I would love that.
Gays only event. Make it a gays only event from now on. Straight man in the first game, fine. We got the white lesbian.
Like, one of the biggest games of the generation. One of the few quadruple A games of the generation you get to play as a trans character.
Oh my god, it would be amazing.
And as Jamie, a bisexual woman of color, just I want it. I want it so bad.
Laura, you're jumping at the bit here.
Yeah. On the topic of if we get to play as Lev, I really hope that Naughty Dog has some conversations about how they do some of their diversity stuff within that studio, if they're going to do that, because we have yet to have like a proper good AAA video game with a trans lead, and like whoever goes first out the gate on that needs to get it fucking like right, because you know, you've got games like, say, J.J. McField and the Island of Memories. Like, there are games that have trans protagonists, but to have your first AAA game with a trans protagonist be one that is so grimdark in nature is gonna be some hard work. And I would like to see it done well, but I would be very, very cautious about it. But Yeah, I can't remember what I was going to say about Lev. Oh, that was it. Yeah. Side note about Lev, one of the moments that made me hate Ellie the most is at the end when she holds Lev at knife point,
yeah.
you know,
Me
to
too.
get her fight with Abby, and I'm like, no, don't bring this.
But
Leave
something on
that boy
note,
out of this.
Where
He is
like
perfect. No,
Ellie just, that's a really, I feel like but that's why also I like about this, just jumping all over the place. Go to the end, go to the beginning, it does not matter. With that ending
That's a social
scene,
construct anyway.
yeah, exactly. It's all, I mean, if Last of Us can do it in the game, we can do it on this podcast, is what I say. So
This is just a whole parallel
it's just
to the
all,
entire
right,
game.
we're going flashback,
Yeah.
we're going flash forward. But
Yeah.
in that ending scene, something that really struck me, with Ellie being like, "No, you need to fight me," and Abby's like, "Dog, I ain't trying to square up with you. I just want to dip. Like, let's just
Dog, I just work here.
let's just be done."
I just want to
Like,
battle later.
I also like is toxic and fucked up as that scene was, where I'm like, Ellie, you're so like. The Last of
Go
Us, everyone
home.
The Last of Us needs therapy. I'm like, y'all need to go to therapy and then be done. But that scene, what I kind of also loved about that scene, even though as dark as it was it kind of reinforced this idea of like Ellie has a death wish, and I feel like that's been brewing since the first game. Like, there's one of the lines that does floor me in the first game, because there are a couple, is when Ellie says like, I was with my friend and she turned. And I've been waiting.
I'm still
to turn.
waiting for my
I'm still
turn.
waiting. Yes, I'm still waiting,
Waiting
for my turn.
turn. Yeah.
Oh, I just want it. I just does so much for me, and I think Ellie, in many ways, is forever waiting for her turn. And I think, as much as she does want revenge, I think she also kind of wants to die. And and Dina kind of makes this offhand comment of, "Oh, you're too reckless." So we kind of get this idea early on that like, not just that Ellie is a bold character who will like go out and do things, but also that maybe she is kind of reckless, and maybe she's reckless for like that kind of reason subconsciously. Obviously, this game
She
hasn't
doesn't
directly
care.
dealt with suicidal ideation, but when she wants Abby, she doesn't just want to kill Abby. She wants Abby to fight back against her, and I'm like, I think part of you just wants to get the shit beat out of you because you just want to feel something because you're that broken. And it's dark, but I like that as a way to kind of just build Ellie's really dark character, because she's gone through so many things and dealt in isolation for so long.
This is exactly it, and I do want to come back to Abby, because we are so not done with Abby. There's so much more that we want to say about her, but I do also just want to touch on the fact that Ellie is suffering from enormous
Survivor's guilt.
PTSD. Well, survivor's guilt,
yes.
and PTSD, which is touched on in that scene, and you sort of suddenly realize, of course, in the scene when she's corralling the sheep and everything, and then she suddenly like snaps back there, and we were all like, oh god, something terrible's going to happen. Like, I don't know about you all, but I was just like, oh, what's going to happen? And then of course she's suffering from PTSD. It's a massive traumatic thing that she's been through, and I think for her it's something that makes her very single-minded. The reason she has this death wish is because she's just, every day is traumatic, and if you flipped through her journal during that period of the game, it's just, she says over and over again, just like, my skin hurts, and just these
I sleep, I can't eat.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's
her very existence hurts. Her very existence hurts her.
And so while I didn't relate to her decision to leave JJ and Dina at the farmhouse to take revenge, I understood it. Yeah.
I understand it from the perspective of the two defining moments in her story up to this point, if you look at Left Behind and the first game, are me and the girl I loved were both supposed to die, and I didn't. Survivor's guilt. I was supposed to die so that the world could be saved. I didn't. And there's this line at the end of The Last of Us 2 that I think really well ties into this, where she says, let me find it, I've written it down. I was supposed to die. My life would have fucking mattered, but you took that away from me.
Yep.
And that sums up so much about like why she can't give up this death wish is, the two defining moments of her life, the time she found out that she was immune and the time that she was told she wasn't going to be a cure, were both defined by, I was supposed to die, but I didn't, and other people are dying because of my inability to die here.
She wants her life to mean something, because she is the only one in the world who has the ability to develop a vaccine, to be a cure, to lead to some scientific discovery that can save people, and the fact that Joel took that away from her is something she won't ever forgive him for. And
can we talk about? I know Lucy mentioned that we need to get back to Abby. Can we start from that point actually of Joel killing the
you can start from
doctor?
wherever. Just pick a point.
Lead on.
We are doing like hopscotch. We're going everywhere.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Let's do it, Bliss.
Let's do
the
it.
reveal that Joel killed Abby's dad, who is the doctor from The Last of Us Part 1, right, was such a mind-blowing reveal for me. Like, that was something that I actually wasn't expecting. So when we got to that moment, and when I slowly started realizing like what was happening here, especially when you were playing as younger Abby and having that moment in the park where you have the deer that's stuck in the wires, and Abby's dad calls you over, and you have that moment.
The zebra, yeah.
Zebra, yeah, not the deer, the zebra, yeah. And you have that moment where it's like, oh man, this is like a really pleasant family here, and then you realize who that is, right? Like for me, that was that I think probably for all of us, right? That was the starting moment of like, oh man, we killed a lot of their people. We killed this guy right here. We've been hunting down this girl over here. We literally just killed Owen, who's also in this scene. And yeah, I think they do such a good job of flipping the script so quickly in a way where I think all of us go like, oh shoot, and then progressively throughout the rest of the game, kind of convincing on why like Ellie's actions are putting her down this road of destruction for not only herself but for people who may not necessarily, I don't know if deserve is the right word, because I think you can make arguments that any and every of these people deserve death or whatever, but for people who are, for all intents and purposes, kind of equal to each other, right? In terms of how much they might deserve that.
My boyfriend just pulled this beer away from me as he was handing it to me, and it just made me laugh. But really quick, small, and not eloquent take at all. Does anyone else just love like the flashbacks of them as kids? Because I feel it gives me Scooby-Doo kids vibes when they're just
totally.
Cute.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, I know this is like you're dealing with death and like there's clickers down this motel, but like you're so little.
I think it all plays together, right? Yeah, because it all plays together, right? Like you're showing what these people might have been able to remain if the world didn't break down upon itself.
I agree, and I think that it's also for me. What this game did so brilliantly is the first half. Abby is so hateable. It's so hateable. You just hear, I hated her. I hated her ugly scowl. I found her like abhorrent.
Can't stand your bicep.
At first, I found her.
Braid.
Her braid
shit
would
me.
piss
The
me
braid
off for some reason. Yes.
That's
and
an
then when she doesn't have the
Australianism,
braid
but
at
like
the end,
it was
okay,
so
we'll keep going.
realistic though.
Like
'cause you
when
could
they
see the
took the
strand.
braid off at the end, it's like.
Don't even go there. But Jean, you and I had talked about this. That she was so. I found her ugly, not because of her character model, but because I saw that look on her face as she swung the golf club. Yes. And I was like, you are a horrible person. And I'd really made my mind up. And Jean, again, you were saying that she felt like this kind of like end boss, that you just always had tabs on you. And then, of course, at the very sort of turning point of the game when Jessie is killed and you're like, oh, God, this woman is back. And like, she's
found you right away. She zeroed in on you.
She's
like,
zeroed
oh
in.
My God,
of course, she had exactly. She's had tabs on me the whole time. She's the fucking devil. And then what this game does so beautifully, and the flashback to her as a child goes a long way to kicking that off, has completely changed my mind about Abby. And I grew to love her face, and to the point where when I was holding her down in the water and she was so wasted away, and I could see her face just sinking under the waves. I was like, tears were just streaming down. Like, even talking about it right now, like, makes me really emotional. I grew to like really love her as a character. Again, I think that it's sort of seeing that awkward kind of large kid, like her as a kid, like that awkward kind of like shy, like, oh, Dad, how long have you known? When he mentions, her and Owen. And I've seen that kid. I knew that kid in primary school, and all of a sudden, I suddenly realized that this was a human that we were dealing with, not an, like, as you say, Jean, not a Far Cry boss, not like someone who was always, ready to strike a mastermind. She was she was a person, and the flashback was so important to me, and of course, Bless, like, so important in establishing that relationship with her father, which was such a linchpin to all of her motivations in the first half of her journey.
One interesting thing too,
Owen was such a big part of Abby's character too. Go ahead.
Yeah, like one interesting thing too, and I forgot who mentioned it originally, but like that idea of like with so as far as 11 original Ellie, like Last of Us 1 Ellie parallel, I thought it was really cool too how they had those moments where like Lev asked Abby, I forgot how he phrased it, but he was basically like, have you like killed a lot of people is kind of what he was asking, and like Ellie asked that too before.
Yeah.
Like, how many, how'd you know this, or how many people have you killed, or have you been this bad person? And I love that, like, one thing that was interesting about that with Joel versus with Abby is Abby was a lot more like straightforward in a way. She was just kind of like, this isn't the time to talk about it, versus Joel was kind of more standoffish. So I think in a lot of ways Abby, despite being this very like just a straight up force, like a reckoning, like she is so badass, she's also like just very warm when it is appropriate, and the way she can switch between those seamlessly, I think it's just a very relatable thing.
You see that warmness with Owen too. How sweetly I started to come around to Abby. I think I mentioned it in the DM when Abby lifted up Owen to get over that ledge, and then Owen was like, "Whoa, you're really strong," and Abby was like, I was like, I fucking love that smirk. I love that. Like, she knows how strong she is. She knows she can kick Owen's ass. And I love that familiarity that they have. I don't even know who ended what, between Abby and Owen.
That's true. We
but
don't know that.
Yeah,
I think it was implied that it was Owen.
Together.
It does. The impression I got was that Owen left because I think it's meant to be a deliberate parallel to Ellie and Dina, in that they both have this relationship's going really well, but my desperate need to go and seek revenge is ultimately putting too much of a strain on.
Oh, yeah, you're right, with the aquarium. That's a good point.
Abby manipulated Owen into the whole plan. Owen didn't want to go at all, and look at Owen trying to appease Abby's emotions ended up with. His baby's mama is dead, he's dead, and Abby's life is completely ruined because he decided to just go along with Abby.
I think there's so many moments, like looking back on the game now, like watching like the first part of my boyfriend's playthrough, I noticed so much more how often Dina, like, she was so down, and like shout out to Dina for being like down as fuck for this mission, but there were so many moments downtown Seattle which she's like, yeah, what is this? Well, I guess we're just gonna do this. Do you really want to? Do you know why? She's kind of, as much as it might be read as manipulative, I like that she is very subtly pushing back on this whole plan, because I think deep down she knows that this isn't the right thing to do, but she's going because she loves Ellie.
She loves Ellie.
To support her. Like, shout out to someone who's supportive in the dream that they don't believe in. Like, we all need that person, right?
But the relationship is new too, right? Like, they only just started dating like a month or two before too, so she was learning more things about Ellie, even though they had been friends for about 5 years at that 4 years at that time.
Yeah,
and that
I get the impression.
No, you go, Bossing. No,
I was gonna say I get the impression too, talking about Abby and her breakup with Owen. I get the impression that ever since that moment happened in the hospital, that she's been fixated on Joel for those like 4 years between her and actually killing Joel. To the point where, and this is mainly what I've gotten from conversations, I kind of want to replay the game so I can get more out of it, because I feel like I always miss little things. But the impression I've gotten is that that was the thing that made her break up with Owen, her fixation on Joel, but then also like that's the thing that kind of made her get ripped and turn into this killing machine, is the fact that she wanted to go and like hunt down Joel, which I think is like a really cool thing.
Yeah, because she talks about how she's never going to miss training because she needs to be strong and buffed to do.
Like, Ellie has all this hate, but like, where are the games? That's what I want to know. Like...
Yeah, and that's why the theater showdown happened the way it did. Like, Abby beat some ass because Abby's like in the position to beat some ass, which I think also.
Yeah, like,
I think that also then like frames the ending in a very interesting way, because like then Ellie's faced off with a powered down
emaciated
Abby.
Yeah, and I love the way they like use that narrative, and I love the fact that this game that's like very gameplay heavy, like we can just talk about the story for forever, but I love the way they use that narrative to create the gameplay moments, because when you do face Ellie in that theater, Ellie isn't strong, but she's very sneaky. She has the trap mines. She has like these other things that that Abby doesn't have. Like all of Abby, even her tool set.
Every time I threw a goddamn bottle, she knew where I was throwing it. I swear to God,
and like Abby, like she doesn't have the trap mine. She has the fucking pipe bomb, and like she's just gonna go in. And she, like, I love how like And it's interesting too. I think it's an interesting contrast how Abby, who is kind of the more aggressive character in both her actions and also her design and also just like her motivations and her weapon set, she's more aggressive inherently, but she ends up being the one that has like the empathy and she's the one that pulls back. Like, you know, you're messed up when you're the like Abby's the one who's sympathetic here and Ellie's actually the monster, and I love that contrast there.
I also just want to touch on the fact that so much of Abby's warmth comes through in gameplay moments, not in cutscenes. So, you know, so much of her inherent kind of character building and sort of, again, the game showing us who she is. I got really affected by the fact that she was scared of heights. Like, here's this massive, like,
that crane part
of a human being, and she's so scared of heights, and it's just such a beautiful, but she's sort of, again, in a very relatable way, in a sort of way that's like, yes, I get it. Of course, this is absolutely terrifying. It would be terrifying for any of us, but like, I just loved that it was terrifying for her, and it just went such a way to, again, I mean, at that point I was already sold on Abby, but it took it that extra level to just really sort of endear her to me, and I was so. I just loved her. I thought she was such a beautifully crafted, unexpected character in this game.
Sounds like you're making the same point too, but it seems like that making those warm moments during gameplay was on purpose because we had to embody Abby. We had to become Abby. So we feel that fear. We feel her annoyance when Lev is just asking her, like, so what was up with that you and Owen? That was kind of awkward as she's like climbing on and she's like, oh my God, Lev now? You know, like, I love that part. You know,
Dude, that crane moment too was awesome.
I definitely died in one of those moments, and I was like, "That's awkward."
Oh,
But like,
I died so bad, yeah.
oh yeah, I totally died. Lev was like, "Don't worry, Abby, it's fine." I just had to.
Credits are rolling. That's the last part too.
Yeah, it was really tragic. I was like, I ruined the narrative by like my shitty gameplay.
It's like a Prince of Persia. Well, that's my story. Like Laura Bailey's like, that's my story.
Laura, you look like you're about to jump in.
One thing I really like about the way that they handled Abby and trying to get us to sort of initially hate and then later relate with her is that in the first half of the game, you have no control over her, and a lot of the framing of scenes lingers on the violence she does. It's not that she's necessarily doing more violence, but it lingers on it. It views it from an outside perspective of something horrible being done that we can't stop. Which is why I really like that when we get control of her, those nice things are gameplay moments, because it's really nice to have that stark difference between lingering on horror that you can't control versus little moments of niceness that happen while you're just going through the world. It's just a nice contrast.
Yep.
Like in the game in general too. Like I like that. And sometimes people take this as a criticism, which, once again, it's up for interpretation on whether you thought this was effective storytelling or not. But I like that a lot of Ellie's really gruesome stuff is cutscened, but there are a few moments of, like, Nora in the tunnels where you have to press square. Like, you have to go ahead and do that. And I also like that, like, that wasn't done for shock value because it didn't show Nora. It just showed Ellie. And I like that it kind of turned the camera literally on Ellie and to see, like, her almost lack of humanity in that moment, because Nora was going to die anyway. Like, Nora was either going to become like infected, or like Nora wasn't a problem. She didn't need to kill Nora, but she did. And I think
it was not the interesting thing to look at. It was,
and it's a great thing that they made.
Face.
Yes, and they made you kill her.
100%.
And you didn't need to kill her. Like, you didn't need to do it, but they made you do it, and I think that was really powerful.
So, going back to Abby, because for me, the moment that is most touching for me that I haven't heard anyone bring up, and that like makes me teary just thinking about it, is when she's at the aquarium and Yara gets her arm amputated, and she's talking with Mel, and Mel understandably says, like, you are a shit person, like, you are an awful person, because she, not only is she still thinking about how she had to play a part in killing Joel, even though she didn't want to, since she's a medic, and she's just not she's not a grunt, this isn't what she likes to do, but also the fact that she knows that she and Owen are still in love with each other, and that his priority is still with her. So you know that she has a valid reason to say, like, you are a shit person to Abby. But for me, the moment that sold me on Abby is when Yara comes in and she tells her, you're a good person. Because there is so much validity in Yara's perspective and seeing her
Yes.
as a good person,
Yes.
just as there is in Mel's, and like that moment just gets me so.
I love too the fact that like in that
there is a
scene,
lot of validity in both.
yes,
Yeah.
and that like I love that Abby feels something about that because we see that earlier teased like in the warehouse where there's a suspended boat where she's talking to Mel and she's like, oh, like, I feel like you've been avoiding me. And Mel's like, well, yeah, I think Joel deserved it, but, like, I feel bad that I took part in it.
And I want to take part in it.
Yeah, and then Abby kind of responds, like, yeah, like, what
kind of
person
horrible person would do that?
Exactly.
And she's like, no, that's not what I meant.
Exactly.
No.
And so I think Abby does internalize some of that with herself.
She does.
Yeah, she does.
So when she got the criticism directly, I feel like Mel said what Abby already thought about herself, and that's why it hit so hard.
Yeah.
And I love that, like, someone as badass and strong as Abby was like crying in that scene. Like
that's the only moment she cries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So like touching on Abby's vulnerability, which I think is a massive part of her character. I think we see it a lot throughout this game. One of the big talking points, at least today, has been the sex scene between her and Owen.
Yeah.
And I do want to touch on that because you know, in isolation, I understand that it looks very it's aggressive and it's not pleasant to look at, right? But I think for me that scene felt very raw and very real because she has loved this guy and she's an awkward character. She doesn't think I never got the vibe that Abby thought much of herself. Like even as a little kid, she always kind of felt like she was being led by others. And I never really got that. Yeah, she always struck me as being someone who was sort of full of self-doubt, and she loves Owen, who is this like basically. I mean, I did love Owen in terms of he kind of just reminded me of like I loved it. He's kind of like a dorky, like charismatic, like white, like
Owen is great.
Best white man ever.
He was like he was like
the thing that makes him interesting is that he's really self-assured because his moral compass is very defined. Even though he's part of the WLF, he still finds the humanity.
He has great taste in Aquarians.
He didn't register me that he technically cheated on Mel because I was like, oh yeah, dude, you should totally fuck Abby because you guys love each other, man.
But I think my point with Owen is that she doesn't necessarily have the certainly in that moment, she doesn't have the greatest taste in men. She reminds me a lot of several women I know in my life who kind of go for the who go for the wrong type of guy every single time. And I thought that scene was very intimate. It was challenging, but it was very intimate. And I think we've all been there when we've been fighting with someone that we love and that we're very sexually attracted to, and there was a lot of charge in that scene, and the way that it went from combative to sexual. I mean, it felt like a very organic switch. Yeah, it did not feel like it didn't feel forced or weird.
It was like this weird.
I've been there before.
Yeah, it's like it had this like frustrative and like sad edge to it, which is like, and once again, I think not that we want to talk about like the. I don't want to call it the discourse. I want to call it like, I don't know, the shit show or something else.
What Kim's nuance?
Right? Yes,
timeline.
Like,
well, I mean, the nuance that people are fixating on,
and people who haven't even played the game,
very reductive.
Are the things that people have pointed out. Yeah, like I don't know. I feel like a lot of media has definitely done like the hate fuck, right? Like, and that's kind of, it had that element to it. It wasn't completely hateful. Like, I don't think it was done in like a morally bad way, but it just kind of had like a lot of different emotions tied to it. And I wouldn't say like I like or hate that scene. I could kind of like leave. I feel like if we didn't have it, it would be fine. But I kind of like that as like an acknowledgement, though, of Owen's feelings for Abby as much, and the fact that it didn't just have like love in it was kind of, I think, part of it. It's like this weird conflicted thing of like, and then Abby's kind of calling out. Oh, and this isn't the first time Abby has called out Owen. Like, besides his leaving the WLF, there's also just kind of his hesitance towards the whole Joel thing. Like, Abby is consistently frustrated with Owen, but also like attracted to him to some degree. And I think that scene, even though it wasn't sexy and it wasn't loving and it wasn't a lot of things, but I think it was reflective of their relationship, and I liked getting to take the lens to their relationship for a second, even though, did have to be a sex scene, maybe not necessarily, but like, I think the fact that we all knew what that scene meant, I think that's why it was effective.
I just want to briefly say that it reminded me a lot, like both from a visual standpoint and from, you know, a thematic standpoint, in terms of the character sort of emotions of that scene in Brokeback Mountain when they're in the tent and the first time they have sex.
Yes.
And it's just like, you know, and it's just like, especially, you know, for one of them, he sort of hates himself while he's doing it, but it, like the urge is just there, and it's
that's a great parallel. Go ahead, Laura. What's up?
And
go on.
Go ahead, Laura. Go ahead.
It's sex scenes about unresolved emotions. It's we have this complicated dynamic that we're not making the work to work through and get to a good conclusion with. So it's just kind of lingering in the air, and that's the kind of scene that produces.
Yeah.
Exactly. The horny is the emotion that dominates every other emotion during that scene, right? And that happens. And the dumbasses complaining about that scene today, about how raw it is and everything like that. Like they are the ones who would probably do exactly what Tommy Wiseau did in The Room, have saxophone music and like these loving, like weeping sex scenes or whatever. And then they're just staring at each other's eyes. Like, no, sex isn't like that. I'm not sure if I think my first time I ever had sex was like I thought about it like that, and it definitely wasn't even like that. You know? So.
Yeah, I think that's like a really
nuanced thing.
It did feel very like human. Like maybe it wasn't. Hopefully, not everyone's sexual experience is that all the time, because that'd probably be negative. But like that idea of it being like a little bit almost uncomfortable. Like I think too, like sex is, you know, this became like the sex cast all of a sudden, but like it's a very intimate, personal thing. And like watching someone actually have sex would be really awkward. That's why porn is staged, right? Like I think that scene, like it was.
Wait, porn is staged?
Hopefully the good porn is staged, the bad porn is like unethical, so that's a whole other thing. But yeah, it was kind of meant to make the viewer feel uncomfortable, because like we literally, at least narratively, are like watching them do this thing, and like this isn't something they're putting on for people. This is like their real and raw like moment of it. And I love that it's tied up to all these other morals too, because it's like, yeah, that is him cheating on Mel. That is Abby knowing that he's cheating on Mel and not caring, right? Like it's there's so many things compounded in that moment. That ends up being like, oh wow, it's like, I love the drama of this game where like everyone's pregnant and everyone's fucking and it's all just crazy. But Blessing, I'm curious, how did that scene sit with you when you first played it?
Fine. I thought they did a good job with it. I'm in agreement with all you guys that I think they did a pretty good job of making it more so an emotionally charged scene than a scene that, like, I'm a fan of sex scenes that don't feel like they're here just for us to gaze at and like get horny at. Like I'm definitely down for a sex scene that feels like it is, you know, them taking control of the moment and really selling a message and where these two characters are at in both of their journeys and where they're at with each other.
A character moment. Yep.
Yeah, like I think the sex scene was a really good character moment between Abby and Owen. I think they did a really good job of selling where those characters were at in that moment in a way that by the time we get to the point where Ellie has killed Owen and we get that confrontation between Ellie and Abby, like we understand Abby's hurt. Like we understand, like in all the complications. In all the complication that we have between Ellie and Joel and what their relationship is and where their relationship has gone by the time that Joel is taken away from Ellie, I think we get that with Abby, with how Owen and Mel, but mainly Owen, was taken away from Abby and how she feels in that moment.
I think it's a really nice litmus test to where the relationships in this game are when sex scenes happen, because by comparison, you've obviously got Ellie and Dina at the start of the game who are very much more opening up to each other and addressing like, hey, we feel like this, but we just need to get it out in the open. And for that sex scene, it is there to be like, hey, let's stop pretending this isn't a thing that we're feeling, and let's just bring it out in the open. So it's a very positive scene. But Owen and Abby's scene is completely the opposite. It is we have these feelings and we're going to get a quick burst of them out to tide us over and then just go back to not talking about this.
But Laura, I think that's why it was important for us to see the Abby and Owen scene, because a lot of people have said, you know, they didn't show you know, Ellie and Dina's scene.
There's no character development.
Yeah, but in an explicit way. But I think, you know, for them, what we would have seen if we'd seen Ellie and Dina having more, you know, explicit sex, is it would have felt gratuitous. to me. It would have been like, why am I like, okay, that's fine. But like, we needed to see that the rawness, the very real open rawness of the Abby and Owen scene, and that sex scene spoke, as we've all said, spoke volumes about where they are and what the stakes are. So I think it was important that we saw it in its kind of like rough.
Yeah, to kind of echo that, I think what we saw. I think we saw the important part of both of those sex scenes. And in the Abby and Owen case, it was sex because they didn't really talk afterwards, right? Like, it was like days later where they're like, Owen's like, oh, that actually meant something to me. And Abby's like, I've got some other shit to deal with. And it was just kind of this awkward whole thing versus like with
Owen, man.
with Ellie and Dina, it was very much like what we saw was like the post-coitus thing, right? It was like that whole like them having a conversation and trying to like be. We saw them being intimate, but we didn't see them fucking. Versus, like, Abby and Owen didn't have the intimacy. It was just like, I don't know, you got someone pregnant, I'm mad, but also, like, let's hate fuck really quick in the back of this boat and just call it a day. And, like, that's all we needed for that character development and that arc, because that's what they were.
What I really like about this...
Sorry, go on.
Oh, what I really like about the scene is that it felt also a little, like, quietly revolutionary in the sense that, like... You see Abby's chest, and like it's not in a voyeuristic manner, but you see her body, and the bodies of women like her are so rarely normalized. Like I have a friend who deals with a lot of body image issues because she's very flat-chested. She wants to be someone who's buff and has buff arms, but she struggles with like femininity and also like being desirable to the people that she's attracted to. And when I saw this scene, I thought of her because it's like these are not the bodies of women that are normally seen as attractive and thus deemed worthy of being shown on screen.
And I think really quick, that's the difference between it being like, as Lucy mentioned, voyeuristic versus like narrative focused. Like this wasn't meant for us to think that this was super hot or sexy. Not to say that like their bodies aren't attractive, but like it was meant to be part of telling that story. And like the reality is like, like maybe this is controversial to say, but like if you film regular ass people having sex, it doesn't look good. It doesn't necessarily look like it's it's not about the, that whole angled thing of like what pornography is. It's, I mean, like that's kind of all I'll say there. Like imagine yourself having sex with someone and that being filmed, it probably wouldn't look that good. Like no shade to people that want to do home movies and watch them again. Like that's the reality of it. It's very like, in a sense, animalistic and raw and real, and I think they captured that really well in that scene because it was just that. Like, it was nothing but that. I think they stripped it down to its rawest form to convey, like, what their relationship was. So, in that sense, I felt like it was really effective.
Yeah, and even to the Ellie and Dina scene, right? Like, I couldn't imagine a way in which they could have framed that scene that would have been on the same level of, I guess, rawness as the Abby and Owen scene that would have felt all right. Like I feel like with the Ellie and Dina scene, that with that scene being as early as it was in the game, and us not being at the point where like we know Ellie, but like we don't really know Dina, and we also know Ellie as a 14-year-old and not necessarily as an adult. At this point, I feel like at the point where we get to that scene, it wouldn't necessarily feel right to see like all the nudity and all the rawness and all the bits there in a way there in a way where like 15, 17, I forget how long it is, but like 17 hours into the game where we get that Abby Owen scene, we know where we're at in this game. We know who these characters are. We know what their relationship is. It doesn't feel like hey, let's just give the people what they want and show people banging. Like, no, it feels like it is actually earned in a way.
It would have also veered into fetishization just because of the history that queer women and sex scenes on screen. Yeah, like it. They did the right thing and just making it about intimacy and not.
Yeah, I agree, and that's something that like a lot of just really quick, like something that a lot of people, obviously trolls, like in the comments are like, oh, like I hope I see like these two women having sex, and it's just like it's creepy and weird, and I like that. I agree with you, Nat, and that I like that Naughty Dog didn't lean into that. I don't know how, obviously we don't know their process right now on how they decide to make those scenes or not make those scenes, but I enjoyed just seeing like the intimacy of Ellie and Dina, and then also like I liked how that slowly rolled out, kind of like what Blessing was saying, where if it was too soon it wouldn't really be as meaningful narratively anyway, because we still didn't know Dina at that point, but like the scene in the barn, like it was kind of made to like in the promotional like information and trailers, it kind of set it up as if that was the start of everything, and narratively it was. But like in terms of what we saw as a player, we didn't see that scene until like really towards the end of the game, where we had more emotional connection to it, and it felt like it had more of an impact when
Haley
Dina
Gross
said
also
they should be
said-
afraid of you. We felt that because we saw what Ellie did. Like I think that was really effective.
In an interview with Vulture, Haley Gross, who co-wrote the game, also said that that was actually the start of the game, the barn scene, but then they changed it to the ends to make it more effective. I tweeted it earlier today, and I said something like, "Oh, I'm in so much pain because I am in so much," because it's about how they made an affecting kiss scene between Ellie and Dina. So I recommend that read because my memory is a hack.
I did read it as well. Yeah,
it's so good. But Laura, you wanted to say something? I just wanted to interject real quick.
All I was going to chime in is that word intimacy, I think, really works for the Ellie and Dina scene, because like when we look at what happens afterwards when they're sort of post-coital, the first thing that Ellie says that we see after that is her opening up about the bite and her immunity. And even if Dina doesn't believe it yet, it is very much her saying like, hey, look, I've opened up to you, I've trusted you, I'm being intimate with you. I will trust you with this thing that I've never told anyone. It is a scene of trust and about, you know, two people getting to open up to each other.
I agree.
Yeah.
What a great game.
What are the okay? I want to ask something. I want to ask something. Did anyone else here feel like I don't know if it says something about me or if it's just the fact that Ellie is my type to a T in a girl, but like I never once felt that she went like too far. Like I was like, because it makes me think of Dina when after they find out that Tommy had tortured those two WLF members, and Ellie is like, I'm sorry that you have to see Tommy in this way, and Dina's like, listen, if they killed my sister, I would have done worse to them. And so I guess like maybe part of it is because like I love Ellie and she's my type, and I'm like, yes, my murderous girlfriend, I love you so much. But I never once was like, oh, you're going too far, just because I understood.
Oh, she killed a pregnant woman.
Hey, I thought she was going too far when she was going to Santa Barbara. But by the time she got to Santa Barbara, I was like, okay, Ellie, just go for it.
That's when I thought it was too far, because she had created this life and this family with Dina, and I was like, I understand why you're doing it, but it's like, this is too far. But before then, I had not thought it.
I honestly.
Go ahead, Laura.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I just want to just quickly add that I found that section with her in Santa Barbara extremely hard to play, to the point where I thought, am I starting to dislike like this game that I've loved and loved and loved? And do I hate this game now? Like, do I suddenly hate it? And because at that point I was with Blessing, like I was so endeared to Abby, and the thought that and going back to Ellie at this point, like gameplay aside, you know, this is a whole other conversation. We've only been talking about narrative beats, really. Like there's so much else to, you know, so many other sort of gameplay things to touch on. But I was hating Ellie at that moment. Like I didn't want to play as her. I didn't want to kill Abby. I wanted Ellie to just like stay the fuck home.
Dina, just like you have a life here.
Do we think that Abby being kidnapped by slavers for 8 months was necessary?
I think it was necessary insofar as, you know, she got to this point where she thought that she was safe, and where she was going to go, I don't think would have been the right place for her and Liv. And no, go Janet.
Yeah, like I'm not sure. I'm torn on it. It did feel like, I think it was necessary only in the sense that I think and I don't know if Naughty Dog wanted to do it this way, but it felt like to me it mirrored the scene in like the winter cabin of like these hunters trying to get Ellie and like these like semi-cannibal, like predatory experiences. Like that's what it recalled for me. So I felt like it was good for recalling earlier themes in like the first game, but I don't know if it was like necessary. It just felt like it was kind of part of that whole idea of like, I guess in a way it kind of harkened back to the idea of at the end of the day there might be like nuance between factions or whatever, but like there are also some people that just want to like fuck shit up. And it just kind of reminded you that, like, hey, outside of, and one thing I love about The Last of Us 2 is that it reminds you that outside of the world that you can see is like a whole nother universe of people and experiences and things. And I think that The Last of Us 2
Californians
did a
are
really good job of that.
crazy.
Yeah, and like you know, like
Yeah.
that scene where like, and I think on Waypoint Radio, which is Vice's gaming podcast, they talk about that where it's like, oh, you know, Ellie is like this badass and it's this whole thing, but then she talks to Dina and it's like, when did you first kill someone? And it was like younger than when Ellie did. And it's this idea of that there's so many people. It's funny because it's called The Last of Us, but there's so many people who are like this and living those experiences and having those moments. I feel like the slavery angle, I'm lukewarm on it. It was so at the end and kind of rushed that it's hard to really have a good evaluation of it. But to me, as a player, it served as a reminder that, like, sometimes shit's just fucked up and you don't really have a context for it. And that you don't always have a context for the violence that you experience. That's what that scene did for me, or that chapter.
And I think it was a very graceful way. Oh, sorry. I just quickly before I go, because I have to bounce. Because my girlfriend has a call, and I totally didn't realize that this is going to go on for so long. But I could keep talking for hours. I think it was a very graceful way to illustrate exactly what you're just saying, Janet. That there was just the world is chaos, and there are so many other pockets of chaos in among it. But also, I think Abby and Bless, or I forget if it was you who said this. I think Abby needed to be powered down. And I think we needed to, in terms of that final fight, we needed them to be more on an even playing field because it had to be as raw as it would. You know, imagine if we'd been sneaking around with our pistols during that final fight. Like, it would not have had the power that it had. Like, I think Abby needed to be that emaciated. And I do just want to add that it was so heartbreaking for me seeing her as emaciated as she was and stripped of that power.
It felt like Ellie was given that choice twice, right? Like, it felt like she had that original choice when she had that original confrontation with Abby in the theater, where it was, all right, you can't match up to this person. Like, you've done the work, you've traveled to Seattle, you've found her, you have her in front of you, but the fact is you cannot match up to this person because this person is just stronger than you in every way, right? And she was given the choice again, but this time, hey, like, Abby's weak. Abby's been suffering for the last 8 months. Abby doesn't have the same muscle that she had. Like, what is your choice now that you can actually take this person out? And you
have that power, yeah.
Now that you have this power over this person, like, all right, cool. What is it now? And I like the fact that Ellie got that choice again, so that she could come to this realization that it is all pretty much futile. But yeah, like, even outside of that, because I really like that part of it. But for the last 4 hours, by the time we got to the point where you see Abby and Lev all, like, essentially being crucified, I was like, all right, do we really need this? Like, did we need to get here? Like, was this necessary? Like, how did we get here? Because 4 hours ago, we were on our farm.
This is random as hell, but, like, it's an embarrassing thing that I have to admit. It took me too long to find where Abby was on those crosses.
It took me a little bit too. I was like, man, there's a lot of
dead ass the whole way around, and I'm like, it's not prompting me. I don't know where to go.
For me, it took long at the farm because Dina was like, oh, can you get Ollie? I think he's outside. And I was like, sure, I'll go get the dog. And I saw no fucking dog. So then, like, after 7 minutes, I had seen the menu and it's like, reload from last checkpoint 7 minutes ago. And I was like, where's this fucking dog or cat or whatever it is? And it was this miniature, like, plushie on the tractor.
Also, plus those sheep or whatever they were.
Do you have a last thing? You have to bounce.
No, I have to bounce, but I just want to say this has been such a delight. This has been the absolute catharsis that I've been waiting for, having not been able to talk to anyone face to face in so long about this game. And it's just, you've all brought so much to the table in this podcast. I can't, like, I'm going to re-listen to it and, you know, sort of sit on everything that's been said.
Talking about it. Like, this game has so much that we won't even cover even after Lucy leaves and we all get our time to.
Yeah.
We should do it again.
Yeah.
Like a series.
Last podcast part 2.
Right?
Okay.
All right, lovely to see you all. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
So sad. Okay, cool.
Oh,
and
man,
for
now
the
that
record,
she's gone, let's really talk
I'm
about
not
the game.
I will not be. I'm basically just running the wheels fall off because I just want to talk about it for like hours.
Yeah.
I can keep going as long as needed because the sun's going to come up.
Which
here,
is
so
wild,
whatever.
Laura, because you're in this like awkward ass time zone. Also, Blessing, what are you drinking? Like, I have to know. I'm drinking Stone IPA. I don't know if you have anything.
I'm drinking Smirnoff Ice Smash, and also, man, it's hidden. Let me tell you.
No, okay.
It is like a.
Those
It's a
like what people consider like girly alcohol is so strong. It's stronger
dude. It's
than
so
the beers I
strong.
drink.
It's ridiculous.
It's
I'm drinking. So
insane.
it's like pink plus mango, and it's 8% alcohol volume, and this is like this huge ass can. And it's really doing its work. Let me tell you guys.
Yeah.
Like I don't know if I'm like legit. There are parts of this podcast where I was gonna start talking, but then I realized that I was thinking of God of War and not Last of Us Part 2. That's how strong this thing is.
This is why
I will say.
catch her my say.
I know. Also, shout out to Lucy being gone. Goodbye, Lucy. I miss you. But
She
also,
really
I like
was
how we
the
never,
last
we
one
never
left.
even introduced who we were on this podcast.
I
by
know.
the way.
I forgot to do that because I know
Somebody's
a lot of
listening to
you
this
guys
and they're like,
I was like,
who
have
is
we
watching the
started?
vote?
Because I was like, we didn't do the whole
Wait.
like, hi.
do we want to let's even though once again I don't know who's gonna be watching this where it's an hour and 40 minutes in, but to restart, do we
This
want
is
to
the
go around?
parallel.
It might be
This is
worth
the
it to edit
parallel
in
to
like
The
an
Last
intro
of
of
Us
by the way,
2.
this is who's on this podcast.
No, I
Yeah, you
will
could
do
do an
that.
intro.
But
This is a parallel to The Last of Us 2.
Okay.
Like the game contextualizes Abby halfway
Alright.
through. We're
Wait.
contextualizing
Okay,
ourselves
yeah.
halfway through.
halfway
Podcast.
For now, we're just
Hour
man, woman.
halfway through, then Natalie, who are you? Let me.
Hi, I am Natalie. I am the Weekend Red Rat fanboy and currently a contributor to Pace Magazine. I have bylines at Vice, Polygon, all those really wonderful places, and I talk a lot about The Last of Us 2, and yeah.
Oh yeah, blessing.
Hi, I'm Blessing. I'm a host of Kind of Funny Vids, at Kind of Funny Vids on Twitter, youtube.com/Kind of Funny Games. I host Kind of Funny Games daily, about 3 out of 5 days a week, and I host the number top 3 PlayStation podcasts, PSLU XOXO with the homie Greg Miller.
Cool. I'm Jen Garcia. I put together this thing off of a tweet that I wrote, and people actually liked it, so that was dope. I am an associate guides editor at IGN, so I mainly do guide stuff, but I also am featured on our podcast and do reviews, features, and other things at IGN.com.
I'm Laura. I go by Laura K. Buzz on the internet. I am, at the moment, a freelancer. I've done bylines for IGN, Polygon, all the places. I've been editor positions at Kotaku UK and Destructoid in the past. The main thing I do right now is every Friday I do videos about disability and representation access in video games on YouTube, and that's the thing I've been enjoying doing recently, so woo.
And I am Gene Park. I'm the gaming reporter for the Washington Post. Our section is called Launcher. Janet, thank you so much for putting it together. And I also want to thank you personally for putting together the Pokemon Isle of Armor walkthrough so quickly. Because I could not
thanks.
find
That's
the
very much
goddamn
shout out
looping
to
lagoon.
Miranda and also the freelancers that did it, which I think I don't want to
I
miss
could not
names,
find the
I'm scared.
goddamn looping
But yes.
lagoon, and then you guys all helped me find the loop lagoon so I can start leveling up my goddamn Cubfu. So thank you.
Yay. I'm glad. That's awesome.
Oh, you got the Cub Fu already?
Got the Cubfu.
I know. I have
Nice.
not played Isle of Armor yet because I've been so I did the Last of Us 2 guide alongside Brendan Graber, who did he led the way in collectibles and is doing a video walkthrough for
Brendan.
us, which is very cool. That's on IGN.com already. But yeah, it's been a lot of Last of Us. But because I've been so heads down Last of Us, I'm like, I decided to throw this together because I want to talk about the game. I would love to hear from all of you guys what your maybe not favorite moment, but what some of your standout moments were on the game when you felt like the game was special for you. Like for me,
I can
God, I
ask
feel like it was
that
almost
too.
immediately. I think the game does a really good job, as we kind of talked about already, of doing those flashbacks. And I feel like one of the times, this isn't the quintessential time that it felt special, but one of the times that it felt special was when you have the birthday gift with Joel and Ellie, and you go into the museum, and you're sitting in the capsule,
You told me about this,
and you're flying
yeah.
into space. Like, I think that moment was so calm and beautiful in a way that, I think it portrayed both Joel and Ellie in a really positive light, and in a light that they may not have been portrayed in through the gameplay. So that moment, I think I've said this a couple times on the internet and on Twitter and things, but I think this game plays on a lot of the strong suits of walking simulators, and I really would love if more people that played this game played walking simulators. But it has those moments where you can just sit and relax in the moment, the scene downtown when you're in the music shop and you have the guitar and you can play it for as long as you want. I love that this game lets you sit in the quiet moments for a long time, and that was what really made Last of Us 2 special for me versus Last of Us 1. I've mentioned on Beyond already that the special moments in Last of Us 1 first came to me through gameplay. being upside down and having the refrigerator counterate. Like that was really exciting, and I still love that moment a lot. But like for Last of Us 2, I was like, damn, we're going through Joel's house, and it's just quiet and
Oh,
it's
man.
sad, and I love that.
Joel's house. I'm gonna say real quick because I'm gonna go because I'm starving. So sorry about that.
For
But
the-
but my
Please
but
do.
my favorite scene was also the museum sequence, the Apollo 11 landing
Mhm.
mission. And to me, mechanically, it was the sequel to The Left Behind. When Ellie was playing Angel Knights, the Angel Knights arcade game,
Oh
with
yeah.
Riley. And she had to close her eyes and imagine a different world where she was able to play a video game. And then here's Ellie just imagining, transporting, forgetting about her role as the only immune person, forgetting about everything else, and she was just able to accept Joel's unconditional love, like because the love that Joel is giving Ellie is not like parental. Ellie earned it, or Joel had to grow out of it, and it was just really unconditional, and it was crazy. And to me, everyone here says that they disagree with what Joel said. But when I asked my mom whether she would sacrifice me to the coronavirus, she said absolutely not.
I would do the
Absolutely
same
not.
thing Joel
Wow.
did.
Yeah, she said I will never
It
do
made me
that,
think of Life
and
is
I will do it again.
Strange season 1, whether it's like
Yes.
Oh
Chloe or
man. Don't get me
Absolutely.
I didn't
started on
even
that end
think.
decision.
I didn't even think. I was like Bay over
Wait,
the
did you guys choose
Bay.
Chloe? Did you
No.
both choose Chloe?
No.
I
No,
chose
I chose
Chloe.
Chloe.
I chose
Bay.
Chloe.
The whole
I
point
chose
of
this-
the whole point of
Okay.
Life is Strange is that the whole game is trying to tell you that you need to let go. You need to let go of this girl.
The whole
You need to
game
let go of
just
that
says
relationship.
gay, and that's what we did at the end.
The game says a little bit about Laura. What's up? You look at
I was gonna say, you are right thematically, but also I've not spent 4 episodes of Life is Strange fighting to keep my girlfriend alive in order to go, I'll let her go now. It's like, no, I made all these sacrifices to keep
It's
you
the
alive.
lesson. It's the lesson you learn.
The thing is
Sometimes
that
you just need to let
it's
go of
an
love.
individual choice, just like with Joel. Like, do you sacrifice the one person that means the most to you over the many? I wouldn't sacrifice my mom for
Yeah.
everyone else. Like,
That's really
sorry.
interesting that I feel so differently about Joel's choice and about my choice to save Chloe. Oh, that's weird.
Interesting.
Yeah, right. Because it's like you're more involved in one than the other. Like in Joel's case, you didn't have a choice at all. You had to just do it. But
I'm gay in one
because-
and selfish in the other. I don't know what to say.
yes,
Exactly,
but
because Joel loves Ellie like
Yeah.
unconditionally. It's crazy.
Humans are complicated.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's the message
like,
of both games, I think.
I did side to like save Arcadia Bay, but I also do side with. I understand Joel's decision to save Ellie at the same time.
I
so
saved Arcadia and
we're
fuck
messy.
Joel. That was my. It's all consistent, but like at the same time, I did feel for. Like I felt for Joel
I'm gonna hop
partially
out.
through. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, sorry.
Jean, finish saying what you were
Okay.
saying.
Yeah, go
Sorry.
Finish. I want to hear what you say first. It's okay.
I was just gonna say that I felt for. As much as I disagree with Joel's decision at the end of the first game, like I was one of those people that like, and I played the first game actually just a few months ago, so which is pretty wild. And I played it, and my boyfriend watched me, who he had already played it and loved it. And when I got to the hospital, I just stood there, you know, much like Blessing. I know Greg has talked about this a lot, just standing there and wondering like, do I have to do this? And you do, so you know you have to shoot the doctor and the. Well, you don't have to shoot the nurses, but you could if you want to. And I talked to my boyfriend about it after, and he's like, "Oh, I shot them immediately." And I'm like, "Oh, you're like garbage." Like, you know, I was like having this really like strong
you're
opinion
trash.
on it. Exactly. I'm like, "Oh, so you're trash, right?" And I like that it has that duality to it, where even though I felt that way about Joel's decision, like in The Last of Us 2, I saw the humanity of Joel and what Joel meant to Ellie, and I cared about that a lot, and I was invested in that. And what I hope that people will get from this game that play it who are maybe hesitant because of where the plot goes, like I hope they'll understand that, like, you know, like I had that feeling about Joel, but I still love The Last of Us 1 despite having that feeling, and I hope that people that are pro Joel will still have that feeling in Last of Us 2 because like it challenges and pushes you, and I think that like it's good to be uncomfortable with where the narrative goes because like it's a really powerful narrative, and that's why you feel invested in the first place, and that's what I hope people get out of The Last of Us 2.
Exactly. That because you're a critical thinker, Janet, and you're able to
No,
look at a
thanks.
story and appreciate it. So, and I'm gonna hop out, but thank you so much, all. I love
Yeah.
this. I
Thank
loved
you.
how everyone was just building upon each other's points, and like I didn't even I expected great conversation, and now I'm walking away with an even greater appreciation for
That's
the
so
game.
nice. Thank
So
you.
thank you all so much, and you all have a good night.
You
Bye.
too.
Good night.
Bye,
Bye.
y'all. Chat later.
See ya.
Ciao.
All right, so
So, yeah.
let's tear into the game now. Now that Lucy and
Now
Gina
that
are
the
gone, I
normies
have
are
some
gone.
critiques. Now
We
that the
are the
normies are
last of
gone,
them.
let's talk some shit.
Yes.
We are the
Oh my
last
God,
of us.
Natalie. Yes.
An actual critique I do. Well, not even a critique. A thing that I've been pondering a lot and thinking about, and it might be a critique for me for the game. Is a thing that actually Callie Plaguey pointed out in her review, and I wish she was here because she gave the game an 8, and I think she has a very
I also
interesting
love that
perspective
she
on
did
the
a
game.
spoiler version of the review as well.
Yeah.
That was like
Yeah.
dedication to, in terms of writing,
That's
like shout out.
super
I didn't
dedicated.
do that, but she did it. It was really cool. I read that. Go ahead, Blessing.
Thanks, Nat.
But yeah, like one of the things she pointed out, she talked about how some of the key kills in the game took place in cutscene as opposed to gameplay, and that was the thing that actually I sat and kind of thought about a lot, because for me, a comparison I've been making in my head lately to this game is Shadow of Colossus, because Shadow of Colossus is a game I've been thinking about a lot recently, and Shadow of Colossus is a game where have we all here played Shadow of Colossus, or at least know like what happens in Shadow of
Only a
Colossus?
little bit. If you spoil it, I don't
Only
care.
a little bit. Yeah, it
So
doesn't.
I'm gonna get into like tiny spoilers for Shadow of
That's fine.
Colossus, but
I'm
Yeah.
okay with that.
in Shadow of Colossus, essentially, like you're playing as Wander, you're playing as the hero, right? And as the gamer, as the player, we know that all right, we're on a mission to save this girl, and to do that, we have to kill 16 different giant beasts or whatever. And the more and more you play the game, the more and more you kind of realize that like your mission isn't as pure and as good-hearted as you think. And by the time you finish the game, you kind of realize that like you've given into this dark force or whatever. And the game kind of has pretty good commentary or meta commentary on video game violence and our role as the player in this violence. And I think Last of Us Part 2 does a really good job of speaking on that. Like when historically, when you look at Naughty Dog games, specifically Uncharted, there's always the critique there that in Uncharted, Nathan Drake kills hundreds of people. Like Nathan Drake is a serial killer in Uncharted, and the games always end in this place where it's like, all right, yeah, we just finished the action movie, we just finished the action game, we just did a thing, and it's very normalized in a way where like, yeah, it's a video game, so you kind of understand why, but at the same time, it is kind of weird when you sit down and think about it. I think Last of Us tackles it in a very interesting way, because they do tackle that back and well, the whole game is focused on the cyclical nature of revenge and violence and hate. And so the more and more you kill in the game, the more and more things narratively kind of go down that spiral of, oh yeah, like all these characters have contributed to destruction and hate and violence in a way that has left all parties involved, pretty wrecked. And I think Callie made a very astute observation, and I think I agree with it. That it could have been way more satisfying from a gameplay perspective, specifically with how the gameplay mixes in with the story, with the narrative of, what if you, and she didn't say it like this is me saying it like this now, but like, what if us as the player, we were the one that pulled the trigger on Jesse, when Abby kills Jesse, or what if we were the one that pulled the trigger on Owen, right? Like, the more I think about it, the more I feel like that would have made sense for the game.
So much of what the game is doing, particularly in its latter half, is being critical of the choices that were made in the first half of the game. And obviously, the more agency you have in doing those actions, the more powerful it is when the game goes, feel bad about what you did. If you did those things, it's easier to make you feel bad about having done them if you had agency.
Yes, especially because like the first game ends on that note, right? Like we killed Abby's father,
But
right?
you
Like
have
that was
to.
us pulling the trigger.
I guess my question is forced agency still really agency? Like, I also read Kai's review, and I thought it was really good. But, like, if they made us, like, hit the button, like, sometimes, I'm very, like, anti some of Naughty Dog's quick time events, because I think there's too many. But, like, I think in this
The
game,
tap square.
yeah, how much more would it drive the narrative if I did have to do that? Like, I'm honestly not really sold that, like, me doing that murder as pressing square or pressing triangle would really do it. To me, I liked the fact that it wasn't done that often. Like, I liked that the moment when they turned the camera on Ellie in the tunnels, they made me do that in that section, because it was, like, very me facing, versus, like, the other murders were kind of more off screen or via cutscene. And I don't think, for me, I think this is a big debate in what is game immersion. Like, I don't think
having me press a button is enough for me to be immersed in the story. And for me,
No.
as a player, I felt very immersed, even though I wasn't doing the action and I wasn't controlling it. Like, I felt like that was enough to make me feel like I was a part of what was happening on screen.
If you look at a game like Spec Ops: The Line, it's a great example of like forced agency versus actual agency, because there's spoilers for this quite old game. There's the white phosphorus scene where you have forced agency, where you are pressing the button but you have no other choice.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of times in that game where it's like, we're going to point you at, say, these two hanging bodies and imply that you have to do something, but you can just walk away from it. Like, it's a difference between actual agency and forced agency to make a point in a narrative, and that's a whole other debate.
Yeah, for this conversation, I definitely recommend my coworker at Fanbyte, Kenneth Shepard, who also wrote the site's review. Yeah, his piece on how basically like it is kind of faulty, I think, to try to make the player feel bad over the violence of a very specific character. Like, just like, I don't need that level of immersion. I am in the story, I'm following the story and in the footsteps of a very established character that I do not. It's impossible to relate to her because we are not doing exactly what she's doing. And so pushing this whole thing of like trying to feel bad for the violence ends up undermining a lot of it in some ways. I really recommend the piece, but yeah, it just made me think of that piece because it's like I don't need it through the gameplay, I would say. I need it through the story, and I don't need to be Ellie to.
Let me shoot Mel is all I'm saying, guys. All right, y'all agree? Mel's lame. Mel is whack.
I will say that, like, other than
the
pregnancy and like that guilt that comes with pregnancy, I didn't like Mel. Like, okay, wait, really quick, who are your least favorite characters in this game? Mel was hard. It was hard to fuck with Mel because Mel kind of had a lot of negativity attached to her. Like, I don't know.
Mel hadn't necessarily done many bad things, but I did not gel with her.
No, she was hard to roll with. Like, it was.
I feel like all the conversations I've had, people don't like Mel, and I'm not. I don't necessarily like Mel either.
I don't think she's a bad character. I think she's important to the narrative, but like, I think she's deliberately unlikable. She's
a wet blanket.
Yeah.
For me, it was actually Tommy by the end.
Ooh, I like that. Expound.
Because he comes back and it's so complex, just like all the writing in this game. It's so nuanced, but he comes back because he knows that Ellie is the only one who can carry out both of what they want most, which is to avenge Joel. And I understand that, but he comes back and he shatters the illusion that Ellie was holding on to so tightly, like that it was bursting at the seams, but she was still trying to hold on to it nonetheless. And he just comes and shatters it and tells her, look, like they saw a woman built like an ox and she's here in Santa Barbara and we still have to do this. And so I hated him because I knew from the moment that he walked in and started talking that Ellie was going to leave Dina.
That's
and
really
so
I'm never gonna have that happy ending as much as I wanted to believe it.
I think too, like, with what you're bringing up with like Tom, I also hated Tommy in that moment, and I like that you brought that up because I probably would have forgotten to mention that. Like, it was also especially painful for me as a player having like played earlier where Ellie was the one saying, are we just gonna let them get away with this? And Tommy was hesitant. So for Tommy to turn that back on Ellie was like just unbearable. And I like understand why she did what she did. Also on that note too, I wanted to bring this up a while ago, but like I love the characterization of Dina during those scenes too, because like at one point Dina says, like, do you think I haven't also been dealing with trauma?
Yeah.
And I love
she's
that
like, this is not easy. Like, she's like, I did it for you and JJ, but like she's traumatized too.
Exactly.
She just shows it differently.
Exactly. And I love like I like whenever any media explores the different facets of like mental distress or like mental illness or like issues or psychological issues, because sure, Dina isn't going out murdering people, but Dina is still hurt and she's having a really hard time with it, and she's very open about that. But like for Ellie, because she's not bringing down the way Ellie is, like Ellie's kind of in a way inadvertently dismissive of what Dina's experiences is. But I love that Dina's like, I feel this too, and just because I don't show it the way you do, because I'm trying to be strong for us as a family, doesn't mean that I don't feel it. And I love that aspect of the narrative, and that's in Ellie's journal as well. Which now I think you kind of point to Ellie's journal earlier, where it's like she mentions that like Dina talks about Jesse, but like I can't. I don't know how she does it, and it's just like this different way of coping. And I really like the game highlights that element as well.
You can see it when Ellie has her PTSD triggered because Dina's just like breathe and she's like it's good that we're getting this out, like it's good that you are expressing this instead of keeping it bottled in, whereas Ellie operates the exact opposite way when it comes to her trauma, and both are valid ways in operating with your trauma, but it just shows how like just because one person shows it differently doesn't mean the other doesn't have that same trauma. And so going back to Tommy, just also the way that he's very emotionally manipulative about it, and I understand why. I know what it's like to deal with emotionally manipulative people. I've done it for a living, and I recognized it, and it just hurts so much, especially because I wanted this for Ellie, like going back to our original prompt of what the most touching moment for each of us was. For me, it was the farm section, and if you listen to the Fanbite Spoilercast, you'll hear me sobbing about it for like legitimately like 10 minutes. But that scene was my favorite because just like I'll try not to get emotional, but I can't promise anything. Just like what it means for me as a queer woman, as a bisexual woman, like seeing, I've never had an issue with seeing the potential future in which I'm married to a man and have a family, but I have also never seen this potential future that is like equally potential future of being married to a woman and having a family and living happily on our own terms. And like I've never had that, and I've never seen that in a video game, especially with this fidelity. And I could sit here and try to communicate what that scene meant to me, but I can't. I can only say that during those 7 minutes that I was trying to find Ollie, and when he was on the fucking tractor, I was walking around and I could not stop crying, and I didn't know why, because nothing was happening in this moment. It might just be the most quiet moment of the entire game, and I could not stop crying because of what this meant to me, and just the fact that here was this future that I want so much for myself, envisioned so effortlessly. And when Tommy came and took that away from Ellie, I felt like he took it away from me too. So that's why I resented him at the end the most. Mel, I feel indifferent about. Like, she was fine, like whatever, but
Yeah, she was
there
there.
was a hatred.
She was there to be there.
Yeah.
But Tommy, I felt hate at the end a little bit.
Seeing Dina and Ellie dance together, I think, was such a super sweet moment for me, because that was the moment for me where I was like, "This is awesome!" Like seeing this kind of representation, seeing this kind of happiness, especially with the prediction. I think for all of us, with the expectation that like Dina was probably going to die at the beginning or die at some point, and that was going to be the cost for Ellie's revenge. Finally getting to that point in the farm, and seeing them dance together with the baby, having this home together, having this family, and being happy was such a super sweet moment for me. On the topic of Tommy, though, how many times do you guys think Tommy died? Because for me, it was at least twice.
Yeah.
Like literally, Tommy is dead. Like, I don't understand how Tommy lives. Like, he lives through three different tragedies. I don't.
I've rewatched the scene in which Abby shoots him in the theater, and I'm like, how is he not
like
dead?
You should not be
like, let's be like, he is dead.
When he's at the table, he's like walking with like the limp and everything, and I'm like, bitch, what are you doing
when
here?
He showed up, I was like, what the fuck?
Me
like
too,
first he made it out of the Joel scene, which like I get it, because all he did was knock your head with a brick, which should have killed you, but you're here. I accept it.
Right.
When he showed up limping to the farm, I was like, all right, what the fuck? Are you a cyborg? You're a cyborg.
Like,
this is a cyborg.
Rest your time.
This is why people don't believe in video game deaths, because it's funny, because my boyfriend's playing the game now. It's out available to the public, and when Joel died, he's like, Joel's not dead, and I'm like, who's gonna tell him? Like, just like, just like, okay, sure. And eventually, when Manny said it, like, oh, when we killed Joel, he's like, well, I guess Joel's dead, because the marketing, He's like, maybe Joel is like not dead, but I'm like, who did they bury though? If Joel's in dead, but yeah, like
they went to Joel's house.
Yeah, but like that moment of like, yeah, Tommy is like, Oh man, I think I would have liked if Tommy had just died because it feels like the only inauthentic moment in the game where it's like because they make it seem like he's dead, but he's not dead. So
Right.
I was a little disappointed that Tommy wasn't dead. Aside from the fact that he did ruin Ellie's life at the end, I kind of wanted Tommy to be dead.
I think you could still have Ellie's relationship breakdown with Dina still work without Tommy, because all you need to do is have her. She's having the nightmares that she's having. She keeps having these restless nights. She can't sleep, and she by herself makes that decision. I can't ignore this. I feel like I need to have some agency and go do this.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't need Tommy as the catalyst. It just kind of weakens the death that he had.
I think it also like having Tommy be there, like as much as I love this game, like I really do adore it, I think it adds to like this layer of like men control the narrative that women have because like all of these women are responding to things that have happened to the men in their lives, and I think it might have been more powerful if Tommy hadn't been involved because it would have been more of Ellie's agency rather than it being like so many of these things are like Ellie or Abby reacting to like the things that happened to the men that they cared about versus like their own personal agenda towards it. I would have liked to see Ellie just get pissed in her own right, even though I think it would still would have been fucked up to leave Dina. Like I think it would have been more narratively powerful for me to see it just totally come from her the way it did in the initial opening of the game.
I thought of this when we were talking about parenthood and fatherhood and whatnot, because while I think this game you could argue that motherhood is explored through Dina and through Ellie to some extent and through Abby, I think it's very devoid of mothers in general. Like these are not like actual mother figures save for Dina and Ellie up until the very end, and that lasts like 15 minutes. And I'm planning to write a piece on. I'm still trying to organize my thoughts, so I might like hit one of y'all up to brainstorm or something, because I don't know, because it's more of, it's not what the game says, it's what the game isn't saying about motherhood. Because Abby's story could have been about her mother, who was a surgeon, who was killed by Joel, if like the surgeon wasn't a man in the original game. Like it could have been an equally affecting story, but it's so centered around fatherhood. And so one thing that I would like to see from The Last of Us 3, if it's getting made, which I'm sure it will be, because well, we can talk about the ending too, because some of my friends thought it was very finite, and I thought it was very clearly setting up a third game, but we can talk about it later. But yeah, like I hope the next game focuses on mothers more, because I think this is a series that is heading in a direction that is very devoid of motherhood, and I write about motherhood often in video games.
I think it's definitely heading in that motherhood direction, because if you look at our two primary surviving playable characters, you've got Ellie and you've got Abby, both of whom are women who have at some point been in motherhood positions or still are, which I think definitely could make it take that step in that direction.
Yeah.
I think too, like really quick, just because I don't want us to move on without touching on this, I feel like me and Nat have discussed like what our favorite moments of the game are, but like Laura and Blessing, I want to know what your favorite moments are, and then also like what you think in terms of what you'd want from The Last of Us 3 if it were to exist.
Well, even oh, sorry, you can go ahead actually.
Okay.
Well, I was gonna say, to even answer the question of our least favorite character, I was thinking about bringing this up during like the representation discussion, but I didn't feel like it was as relevant. But Isaac as a character, who's like the leader of
Thank you
the
for
wolves.
mentioning Isaac. Yes.
Isaac, I liked when they introduced him. I wish they did so much more with him, because he kind of came and left in a way that
died so
for me
fast
was kind of
that
upsetting.
it felt like why did you even build him up? Like I thought he'd be like a big boss.
The one moment that the game validated my concerns and worries about it was when we were meeting Isaac, and I was like, how cheesy would it be if it was a black guy leading this like militant liberation like group organization? And then it turns out that way I was like, well, I hope you do something with him at least.
It's like, I hope he's interesting, and then he dies, and it's like, what the fuck, man? Like, what the fuck? Especially because like he's very intimidating when you meet him. When you meet him, I was like, all right, let's see where this guy goes. And then like, soon enough, he has like one more scene, and I think that is the scene where he dies, and it's like,
yes,
all right, cool. The one black
It-
dude in
They
this
can
game.
still do so much better with people of color. They nailed the queerness here, and Dina is, as far as I know, I've reached out to PR for confirmation, but as far as I know, Dina is a woman of color. Lev is a
Oh, is
person of
she?
color, but
I
yeah,
assumed
because
she was like Italian or
her bracelet is like descended from like the Middle East, and like they've
Oh,
talked
okay.
about her hair and how
Oh.
they worked to model it sort of like as someone from the Middle East, sort of like that. I'm reaching out to PR, so I'll get back to y'all on that. But as
to very
right
quickly
now,
point out,
Mhm.
really sorry to interrupt you.
No.
You used the pronouns for Lev a moment ago, and I just wanted to mention it.
Sorry, what?
You used when you mentioned Lev being a person of color, you
Yeah.
you used she pronouns instead
no,
of
Oh
it's
he.
no,
Dina.
yeah.
Oh, I thought you said Lev. I thought you said Lev
Oh
and
no,
then
no.
she.
No,
No,
I
no
said
worries.
Okay,
But
Dina,
no,
and
it
then I
was about
said
Dina,
love.
like talking about like
Yeah,
Dina's representation, how she is a woman of color,
yeah.
and like yeah. But
Yeah,
like
and then I said and
okay.
love is a person of color.
no worries.
No,
Like
but
it's
it's a
always
totally valid worry. But
yeah, exactly. Like I think all of us here on this call are like totally like thank you for mentioning
Yeah, no,
that. But yeah, it was
yeah,
Dina, just to double check. But go
yeah.
on, Nat, about
Um,
Dina and her
but yeah, so
representation.
I can't say with like 100% confirmation until
Hmm.
PR gets back on me on that. But they can still do better with people of color so much. Like in the
Yeah,
Yeah,
first
and like
game, it's a lot of killing people
I
of
do
color,
think like
and
one thing I wonder, and this is kind of I think a question all of you guys can answer from different perspectives, but like how do you feel about the idea of like the identities of quote unquote minorities being like kind of secondary to the main story? So like I think, in the case of for instance Dina, like one of her like big aspects is that she's Jewish, and that's mentioned in the synagogue, which is mandatory, but it's kind of like when she talks about the Torah, that's an optional area. Like how do you guys feel about like elements of that being optional versus like part of the main campaign, and like what do you think in terms of representation is like the right way to go about that?
I personally prefer that approach to in some ways to what they did with Lev because
Mm-hmm.
Lev because Lev's narrative is so centered on his transness,
Mm-hmm.
it means that we don't get as much room to explore Lev outside of that. Like he doesn't get so many narrative beats that are outside of his identity, and
Mm-hmm.
it's why I preferred a lot of the other minority representation in the game because it was like we're going to touch on it, we're not going to ignore it, we're going to bring it up when it's appropriate, but that's not going to be the whole crux of their arc.
Mm-hmm. Nat,
I
what do you
I
think about that?
I guess it's easy to get away with not touching directly on race or queerness or like the subjects that this game covers in a way that is resonant with our real world because we're supposedly in this world where the systems have broken down entirely. But at the same time, it's human beings who make those systems. And we've seen the rise of different systems like the WLF or the Seraphites in this world. So I don't know how I feel about it. I think I guess it wasn't necessary, and it does a lot better than some games that try in really clumsy ways to address race and how it pertains to our real world and queerness and whatnot. Um, but I do think they can do significantly better in terms of race, and that's why I made sure to point it out in my review. Like, I had problems with the Latinx character, I had problems with Neil Druckmann using the lynching comment that's a whole other thing. I'm not sure if we should go into that, but just there's there's a lot of work to be done in that
Yeah.
regard. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we can go into it or not, but I like that you brought that up in your review because I think that's like an element of the storytelling that may, like, at least from if you didn't already know the quotes from Neil Druckmann about it, like, it's kind of an unexamined weight that gets put into the story that I think might be worth examining. For me, the representation was mixed. Like, it had moments of it being good, but moments of it may not being as good, and I think I am really optimistic based on this game on what Narda can do with storytelling in quote unquote oppressed groups, but I think there's still room for growth, and I would I'm hoping for if there is a Last of Us 3, whether it's with Lev or a different character, that there's like additional consideration on those aspects, because I know like their accessibility features have been like a big highlight, and I love that, and they've had a lot of accounting on that, and I'd like to see that same level of thought go into the representation of different characters. Not to say that it hasn't already, but like I'd like to see that a little bit more at the forefront. But Blessing, what's your interpretation of like the representation of different characters in Last of Us 2?
I think overall, I really enjoyed it. I think it's one of those things where I think representation in general, when you look at the real world and you look at all of us and how that kind of manifests in terms of who we are and how that reflects in our I guess individual stories, right? Like representation can get really messy, and it can manifest in a bunch of different ways. And so for some of Dina's story, for it to be optional and for some of that stuff to even manifest in that the synagogue scene and the way in which it manifests, I thought that stuff was pretty interesting and pretty compelling. I can't really speak to anything individual aside from like Isaac, because like I can speak to Isaac as a black dude, right? But I can't necessarily speak to how well they represented Ellie, as a gay woman, or Dina as a bi woman, or Manny, as the Latinx character. But I think overall they had a good mix in terms of the overall cast. And I think the thing that I can say about the characters that I think was done well was that I feel like their backgrounds reflected in their stories in a way that made their stories dynamic and interesting, in the way and in ways that made the ways in which they interacted with each other dynamic and interesting. And like I feel like Manny is like the exception of this. I feel like I can see where Natalie's coming from, and I agree in terms of the way that Manny was kind of over the top in his representation and in the ways he would interject with like random slang or random Spanish in phrases. But when I look at Lev, for example, or I look at Jesse, or I look at Dina, as a Jewish woman and as a bi woman, or I look at Ellie as a gay woman, right? I think the ways in which they so naturally allowed those characters to be themselves and allowed those characters to allow Dina to be a bi woman without it being like a fucking like huge, like a fucking huge thing that became like the central plot point of the game, but also a thing that they didn't hide, or a thing that they didn't hide, or a thing that felt like you had to go and do the research for, right? The fact that she had this love affair between Jesse and Ellie, and she's pregnant, but she's also with Ellie, and it's not an overt thing of, look, she's bi, like you see this, like look, like we did it, we have a bi woman. No, it is naturally implemented in her story in a way that yeah, exactly. Right. Like that felt awesome. I think Ellie in the ways that she had those natural conversations. And I somebody pointed this out. I think it might have been Janet that pointed this out earlier in Ellie's conversation with Jesse. That felt very natural and felt very friendly in the way that Jesse was like, so what, you're not into Asians? And Ellie was, and I forget Ellie's exact response.
Like, yeah, that's what I meant. Because she's like, like, you're handsome and all, but you're not really my type. I'm not into your type. And he's like, oh, you're not into Asians?
Yeah. So and like it never felt like, guess what, guys, we have a fucking Asian character, you're gonna love it, or guess what, guys, she's gay. Like it never felt like that, but it also never felt like they felt the need to make it a side story. They felt the need to hide it, or they felt the need to make it a collectible, right? You got that in the main story in ways that felt natural, and in ways that gave these characters personality, gave these characters their own backstories, gave these characters ways in which they can connect with the people playing them. Like I think all of us here can point to a character in which we were like, or maybe not all of us, but for the most part, we can point to the characters and be like, I connect to this character because of their backstory, or for this reason. I connect to this character because of her relation. I connect to Dina because of both her relationship with Jesse and Ellie, right? Yeah. I can connect to whoever character, maybe not Isaac, but whatever character I decide to connect myself to, right? Jesse cool as an American.
I was so surprised that like Isaac died so quickly, because he was kind of like positioned a little bit as the big bad, so I thought it would be a bigger deal. But like
he was so intimidating too.
Yes,
he was horrifying. It was in like whispers that you knew him at first. It was like Isaac this, Isaac that, Isaac wants you
Isaac's
here.
gonna care. Isaac's gonna whatever. You saw like that. You had that brief moment where you kind of walked through what torture and interrogation looks like from Isaac's perspective, and like it was scary. Like I was really surprised that wasn't more fleshed out, and somewhat disappointed. Not even just from like a racial standpoint, but also just from a narrative standpoint. Like it seemed like it would have been a bigger place to like pull that out a little bit more. But yeah, to Blessing's point, I do think they do a pretty good job at like kind of integrating people's identities naturally with the story, which I think is on the whole, at least from my perspective, like kind of the goal of like kind of normalizing these different identities and kind of weaving them in a unique ways that like might not happen. Like the line between Ellie and Jesse wouldn't have happened if it was just like straight white people. Like that's just the reality.
For sure.
But, like,
exactly.
Because it did, like it kind of highlighted their differences, but in a way that didn't feel like it was being obtuse about it or kind of trying to draw attention to it. So on that note too, I know like me and Natalie have definitely shared our favorite moments, but I feel like Blessing and Laura, I'm not sure if you've shared what are your favorite standout moments from this game and then kind of why.
I think narratively, most of mine have already been said by other people. The domestic farm scene is a real, like, it's a favorite not only because of how lovely and how well played it is, but also because, like, as much as painful as it was, the emotional gut punch of knowing Ellie was going to leave and that she wasn't going to stick around for this, I thought was really well handled. I thought it was very impressively done, of like those small seeds of doubt being sown, and like, yeah, you've given. It's the same thing that was going on with Abby. This whole sort of, but there's a lead, and I can't ignore it. I have to play it out. It's the same thing that went on with Owen. It's I can't ignore the chance that maybe I can fix this through going on a quest. And like it was such a bittersweet scene. I thought it was great. But outside of the narrative, consistently one of my favorite things about this game has been all of the disability access stuff going on in the settings.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I know we've briefly mentioned it, but like the fact that the first thing you see when this game opens up is an option that is like, hey, we're going to read this to you. It's a text-to-speech option. Press X if you want text-to-speech to help you through the rest of the menus. Here is a vision, a hearing, and a motor disability preset right out the gate before you so much as touch the game. It's like, hey, let's make sure we can just like get you as quickly and effectively to the settings that will help you play the game as possible. Let's not make it a big deal. Just jump right in. And there's so many settings in that I found personally really helpful. Like one of the settings that like I think is fantastic for just if you're stuck in a scene and like I cannot work out where the interactable is that I'm supposed to be looking for, like the where is this dog in the field scene. I set high contrast as an option that I could just swipe left on the touchpad and go right.
I love the seamlessness of like dipping into those options as well. I think it's a really good point.
But it's like, yeah, it's like, hey, I can't find this thing I'm looking for and I'm getting frustrated in the game. Highlight in yellow for me where an interactable is. Okay, I can head over there. And it's such a nice friction remover for, hey, I don't need it all the time, but right now I just need to see what I can click on and what I can't. Like stuff like that is fantastic. I was messing around with the settings. I played through the first hour of this game with nothing on the screen and managed to do so. The fact that that's possible is impressive as hell. Like there's some things that they've obviously missed out on. Like the big oversight is for blind players, there's no audio descriptions. You are reliant on Foley work and character dialogue and on-screen text being text-to-speech, which can give you a a fairly robust idea of what's going on in most scenes. But like, it would be nice to just occasionally have a little bit of audio that's like, Ellie is drawing in her notebook. She's drawing a rabbit. Like, to give some little context of what's going on in a scene other than what's being said. But the fact that it is as playable as it is without, like, with completely no audio or no visual, is a damn impressive thing that I kept marveling at throughout.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to point out. Like, that was one of the first things that I noticed too when I was booting up the game. Like, I love large subtitles. Like, the larger the subtitles, the better. Take up half the screen. And I immediately turned that on, and that was something that, like, as like someone that's generally able-bodied, like, I still really appreciate having a really large subtitles. And I love that you could play with, like, who was saying what and change the color on that and, like, kind of have that context there. Like, that helps me just, this is the style I play. I think that's the other thing that people kind of forget with, like, accessibility options. They're not solely for people that different able-bodied players. They're also just for like people's preferences, and I like that like adding more accessibility options adds to what people of different abilities can do, but also what anyone can do because it just adds more options to it. And like, yeah, that's something I also really noticed immediately upon playing that I was really thankful for, especially because like you see games patch that in, you know, after the fact. No shade to the Outer Worlds, but like they patched that in later because they know it's
Last year was just games of like tiny subtitles.
Fire Emblem, like so small. Like,
2019.
So small.
Like
It's
I
so
love Death
refreshing.
Stranding, but the text in that game is ridiculous. It's like, bro, what am I reading right now?
Something was up last year with subtitles.
Yes, and I'm playing at point blank range, and I still am like, what's it say? So
Yeah.
I really love that we're adding more of that, and like, you know, that's always an option and not necessarily like a mandate. But I think having the option is super cool.
I would desperately love to see Sony as a first-party initiative go to whoever at Naughty Dog was in charge of like all of these settings and go, take them to all your first-party studios, get them to have a talk on, here's what we did, here's why, here's how you implement it, this is
they
how
have
you
to
do
have
it.
a GDC talk. Like I imagine next year they have to have a GDC talk on
This
it.
is one of the only games that I've seen like have this level of like accessibility critical acclaim since Gears of War, the most recent one on the Xbox, because like I don't know if you guys have been familiar with it, but I follow like caniplaythat.com, and they like always do accessibility reviews, and they were super fascinating on like looking at how accessible is the game, and I love that they have that specific vertical, and I look at them a lot in terms of just like learning more about what games offer and what they don't, and like it's a perspective that I can't pretend that I have because I don't have it. So I love reading their reviews because it kind of gives me that other side of things that I wouldn't necessarily get, and like it's been really cool seeing them recently have a few games that do stand out and are kind of like this perfect score level thing for accessibility. So yeah, I know I think one of the people that works for that site did some consulting on The Last of Us 2. So like, hopefully that becomes more of a standardization across. Like, I think that'd be a really cool differentiator for Sony, especially when you think of Microsoft having the adaptability controller. Like, just pushing more into accessibility features, I think is really important.
Like, software accessibility is no replacement for hardware accessibility. Like, you know, Xbox's like hardware approach is still a fantastic separate thing, but also, like, if Sony could be like, hey, this is our answer to what Microsoft's doing, here is a software level thing that just will be in all our first party games, that'd be such a positive move for them.
But kind of like semi-shifting gears, Blessing, what is your one of your favorite moments from The Last of Us 2?
I think somebody mentioned it, and I think we've already talked about it, but the scene where Yara dies and you see Lev is distraught about it, and you know, Abby's trying to like push Lev along, go, hey, like let's go, and Lev is like talking about Yara's death, right? Like those are your people, and Abby's like, you're my people. I think that is such a powerful line. And granted, like when I recently started playing the game, so like spoilers were like a thing that were floating around before the game came out, as we all know. And one of the spoilers I read was that Joel was killed by a trans character, and so like as I was playing, I was like, okay, so Abby's trans, I guess. Like, and I kept playing with that idea in mind that like this is a reveal that was going to happen. So when that line first happened, I heard that I originally read it as like, oh, okay, that's the reveal. Like, you're my people is Abby being like, oh yeah, I'm trans, you're trans. Like, let's do this. Like, we're together. And I finished the game and I was like, okay, Abby's not trans. I don't think Abby's trans. Like, that's not a thing.
Yeah,
but
like, just
go for it.
Really, really quickly, like, so the whole thing that boiled out of is, here is a character who has broad shoulders and is muscular and is not traditionally femme, therefore shitbags on the internet were like, that's a trans woman, and so
Twitter.
so much negativity around Abby as a character has been,
and it's so strange, and like, I imagine it's half misunderstanding and half just hate, and that's the thing that sucks about it, is that you look at comments and it's like, you guys are idiots. Like, play the game, like figure out what's actually going on here, because you guys are way off. But yeah, the way I originally, because of that that spoiler, right, that was like a very malicious in intent, but had me convinced that like, okay, yeah, I guess Abby's gonna be a trans character. Cool, let's see how this plays out. And getting to that moment, I was like, wow, what a powerful moment between two characters that share this thing. then me realizing that like, oh no, that's the case. That's not the case. These are just Abby just connects with Lev on an interpersonal level, right? On a level that is like, hey, like you and me are both fucking human beings. You and me have connected over the last few days as you've been on the as we both pretty much have been on the run from both of our respective people. We have to go. Like we have to get you to safety. We have to figure out what to do with you. We have to figure out what to do with us. Even still, like throw out the false context that was given to me. It's still such a fucking powerful line. And is like one of my favorite moments of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that as much as like looking back and thinking critically about it, the Fireflies, did they have the cure ready? I don't know. You know, that's like I think the like elephant in the room. It's like we don't know if like Joel would have given Ellie if that would have actually mattered. We assume that it would have, but like we don't actually know because like there's no proof that like that doctor could have come up with a cure. So it's also this other layer of stuff attached to it, but it's this idea of like of not knowing and being okay in that not knowing and just kind of doing what you think is most right. And I feel like with like Lev and Abby, like I love that parallelism between like they're kind of they don't have individual religions. Like obviously Lev is a Seraphite and he has the whole prayer that he kind of says, but then Abby also has the, you know, may your death be quick.
May your death be swift, or may your survival be long and your death be swift, or something like that.
You had it right. So I think I love the parallelism of all of those groups having their own kind of things that they attach
rituals.
to, and and like Abby's was once hope, you know, if you want to think of the Fireflies as hope, but it no longer was, and then her kind of coming back to that after a while because of what Lev had to say.
Yeah. Like none of these groups are necessarily good, right? And
No,
I think they do like even the Jackson group, right? Like even Ellie's group isn't necessarily good. You know, especially when you look at the things that Tommy's done in the past. The thing that I was gonna say J. Cole. The thing that Joel got killed for. I don't know.
That
too. I mean, J. Cole also got killed on the internet. But the thing that Joel got killed for, right? Like, it's not necessarily a good group. You know, the Jackson group, right? Like, they're quite a few of them are going and seeking out revenge for one of their own. Like none of these people are necessarily good.
Well, I think too,
talking about factions.
That's the idea of like something that Ellie brought up, like in the middle, kind of like a middle-ish of the game, where it's like those teenagers that ran off from Jackson. They were I spilled like a lot of stuff, but like that's okay.
Oh, no.
Those teenagers from Jackson were.
You're just spilling the tea.
I'm just spilling the tea. It definitely wasn't like a Stone IPA. It's okay. But those teenagers that ran away, like when they listed their rationale, like one of the aspects was feeling like they had this privilege that they kind of almost didn't deserve, like wanting other people to have the comfort and stability that they had as people living in Jackson. And I think that's I think survivor's guilt and like those issues are like very compounded in like the culture that lives within Jackson, even if they don't mention it. Like I think that's something that like underlies all of the actions that Ellie and Dina take in The Last of Us 2.
I do think this is also a way that the game avoids falling into the all sides, there are good people on all sides thing, because every group is humanized. Like the Jackson group is humanized, the wolves are humanized, but the only Seraphites that are humanized are Yara and Lev, and it's because they have broken out of that system.
Yes.
So I like that at the end of the day, it still does paint the Seraphites, their bigotry, their restrictiveness, the way that they weaponize religion in order to justify murder, as not a humanized group. So I thought that was interesting too, the way that all groups are humanized, but the Seraphites less so. Only the Seraphite members that aren't Seraphites anymore are the ones who get humanized.
Yeah, which is actually like one of the critiques I had with the game. Like I understand why they didn't do it, but part of me wishes that there was a third of the game where you did play as somebody who was a Seraphite that was still part of that group, in a way that they were able to kind of give more validity to, or not even validity, but more context to what this group is doing. Because I feel like we get so much about the wolves, we get so much about the Jackson group, and we know so much about the Fireflies. But when it comes to the Seraphites, like we only really get we see the Seraphites through the lens of Yara and Lev, and both of them are on the run from the Seraphites because the Seraphites are a group of bigots, right? Like they're after Lev for a reason that we all can probably get behind. That is like not a reason why you should hunt this child down. But I do wish that we kind of got a closer look into that group, because I think that could have helped balance out like the story in terms of what they were doing with the overall narrative.
I personally liked that we didn't get more information on the Seraphites.
Me too.
Because I like this idea that how do I put this?
That they're just bigots who like don't deserve redemption.
I know that we've got half the game is about this group and their perspective, Group 1's perspective on Group 2. Then we play as Group 2 and go, oh, well, actually, this is what was going on. I don't think we needed another repeat of, oh, well, that's what their group was doing. Like, I think the point had been made of your perspective of a group might not be the reality of what's inside that group, and I think that I think it would have been unnecessary to repeat that and to go, well, here's some stories of some nice Seraphites and how they got to thinking that gay and trans people are bad. But like,
Exactly.
I like just like sometimes you just don't know what's going on with a group of horrible people. Sometimes they are that way, and you just see them from the outside, and you don't have more context, and you have to make your choices based on their outward actions sometimes.
Yeah, well, while it might have been valuable to see maybe other elements of Seraphites, I feel like we do see that with, like, Yara and Lev. Like, they are the other, right? They're the good Seraphites that we can get behind. And I feel like their inclusion in the story is an example of that being more than what we thought it was, which is that we thought it was just some crazy cult. Like, is kind of the way it's positioned in the story originally. But, like, when you start to hear Lev and hear the way that, like, he takes solace in that prayer. Like, I feel like without being very heavy-handed, it's a great parallelism towards when you're in the synagogue and Ellie asks Dina, do you still pray? And she says yes, and like why she prays and talks about like what that means for her. I feel like that's, without it being obviously a one-to-one because Abby's not seeing what Ellie's experiencing, it's a great parallelism between the two of like, do I really believe in this? To be honest, I don't really know. It's kind of complicated, but like saying this makes me feel like I have security. And when Abby says like, may your death be swift, or I don't know, Natalie knows.
Yeah, may your survival be long. May your death be swift.
Yeah. Like when Abby says that is a form of comfort for her, even if she doesn't tell the camera that. And when like Lev says his own prayers, when Yara says their own prayers, like she has that feeling. And like I love that through line of like people latching onto these ideals and sayings that give them peace and comfort in distressing times. Like that's something that Abby deals with a lot, having been a Firefly and switched over, and kind of saying that like, I stopped seeing the light. I turned my back on the values that I was raised on, and now I'm kind of trying to run it back again, but like way after the fact, and having a hard time trying to get back to that situation.
People need a reason to hold on to, like, at the end of the world, essentially. And sometimes those reasons are justified, even if they're horrible, and sometimes they're not. And I think if they would have humanized the Seraphites for me, I think it would have ruined the game for me. Because I can understand the WLF. Like, we all have that family member who we care about but is like bigoted in some way, and who we still try to reach and communicate with and meet halfway. But there are also some people who are just beyond communication, like some people who are just set on being hateful, on being bigoted, on seeing other people as inferior or subhuman. So for me, I'm also glad that the Seraphites weren't humanized.
Both sides. Sometimes there is a correct side and a bigot.
Yeah, exactly. It would have felt too much like both sides for me if they humanized the Seraphites.
And I guess part of me, I guess within that context too, I think part of me wishes that maybe they allowed us to control either Yara and Lev at some point, because I hear what all of you are saying, and I think what you're saying is correct. I think for me, the way, and one of the big things with the themes of the story is that anyone from a faction that we may not be necessarily familiar with has the capability to be good. And I guess, within the story, like Yara and Lev are the ones that are part of the Seraphites that are, I guess, other and that are good, or they are the ones that we are seeing connections with in this moment. And so, like, I think they could have done something powerful in terms of maybe in that last 3 to 4 hours of the game, maybe at some point controlling Lev. and
It's
having
still
them be the
not
lens through which we see that.
So then I
Still have-
wonder though, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Blessing. If we were able to control Lev and do all that, would Lev stopping Abby have rung the same?
I don't know. I think that's a very good point. In the way that I envision it, and of course, like this is like very much like scatterbrain, like me pulling together like what would I want to see from this game,
There's
right?
so
And
much
like
to unpack here when we're
like
doing it on the fly. So.
for me as somebody who didn't necessarily love the last 4 hours of the game, that whole Santa Barbara segment, like I didn't hate it, but also didn't like necessarily love it in the way that it played out. I think there's a way in which we could have we could have taken control of Lev and had that story be more so focused on like the reflection of his journey and where he's gone and his past with the Seraphites and how he's gotten to this place where he's at now, where he is now with Abby and he is now trying to find a way to like push through and trying to find a future for himself and trying to find a way forward. I think there might be something there, but I think you like I think that's a good point. That if we did play as Lev in the middle of the story during the Abby segments, at what point does that then take away from all of what Abby is getting out of the situation of her being introduced to Lev, of her going through this journey with Yara and them and having to go through this arc? At what point does that then take away from a story that is, for all intents and purposes, focused on Abby and Ellie and what they're going through? I don't know.
I think it might have been too much to like narrowly tackle, but like I do like that they I liked they struggled with multiple narratives in the same way that the first game did, but they kind of blew that up a little bit more. Like, did they blow it up as much as they could have? Probably no, because you didn't play as Lev, you didn't have those emotions or situations, but I like that they did blow it up a little bit to an extent. And I like that, like, I don't know, in a way that, like, Lev's innocence was preserved, because I think if you would have played as Lev and had to do the murder and extreme, like, moments...
The moral compass of this story.
Yeah.
And part of me thinks, like, this is something I actually brought up during the Kind of Funny Spoilercast, and it might have been a post-show thing, so I'm going to bring it up again anyway. But like again, like I understand why they don't do it, because that might make the story in the game just like one too long, and I guess that is the thing. It would make it long in the tooth, right? In a way where it's like, all right, we get it. Like there's good people in every faction. Anybody can change. Anybody can be good. Anybody has the capability. All that stuff. But I wouldn't be surprised if we got a DLC for this game that was a Left Behind sort of DLC equivalent that is Lev and Abby's journey from Seattle to Santa Barbara. You know, I think
I would sign up for that immediately, because like honestly I just loved all this game, like all the other different elements. I don't think it handles everything perfectly, but I think that it explores stuff in a way that like shows a willingness to engage with the subject matter, which I really appreciate. Like I think they were thoughtful in what they did, and I think they were like open to criticism, which is just kind of like a little bit of a generalization, but like just kind of the vibe I got from playing The Last of Us 2. I would love to see that like chasm. I think Naughty Dog as a studio does a really good job at examining the different narrative elements of a character and also exploring that for gameplay purposes. Like I think, like I love that Ellie and Abby played it very differently. Like I think that's very effective from like both a gameplay element and a story element, which I think Naughty Dog in this specific series does extremely well. Like they play between both those worlds really incredibly, in a way that I hope that like people that play this game will like play more narrative games, because like narrative games do this stuff and it's equally exciting, and like that's what I love about narrative games. We can talk about the story, but like I like that Last of Us 2 does both of those. It has the action, it has the narrative, it has all of those elements. I could see The Last of Us 3 being anything. What I love about The Last of Us as a series, now that it is a series, is that it's kind of open to whatever. Like, the whole idea of The Last of Us is a lot of us, right? And I know it sounds kind of cheesy and dorky and, like, you know, inadvertently cliche, but, like, this idea of it being a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different answers is very much what I feel like Naughty Dog is pulling on, what I think they should pull on, where it's like the whole idea of The Last of Us is like a lot of different people, because no matter how bad the apocalypse gets in this imagined world, there's a lot of different perspectives that come out of that. And I like that in The Last of Us they're exploring queerness, they're exploring like these different identities, because like the reality is like, you know, as opposed to maybe a lot of other game studios, like this is a reality. Like queer people exist in the apocalypse, even if you think that like maybe they wouldn't for some weird reason. Like I like they're leaning into that, and I hope that they
That'd be an awesome
are
shirt, by
thoughtful
the
about
way.
that.
An awesome shirt would just be "Queer people exist in the apocalypse."
Yeah,
I
no,
feel
but
like
for real,
that'd be
like,
something I would rock.
And I love that they have that, because it makes the apocalypse feel more genuine to me, even as like a player that's like ostensibly straight. Like it's something that feel like, I like that they don't highlight that in an excessive way either. Like I think there's ways to play that, and I think they've done like a relatively good job at it. I think there's probably room for growth as well, but like I like that they're trying it and like working on being challenged on that in a way that other studios might not be. But yeah, it feels very like authentic to me, and that's what I've always liked about The Last of Us as a series. Not that it is a series, is that like it deals with that. I like that at the end of Last of Us 1, I didn't like Joel. I like that at the end of Last of Us 2, other people might not like Joel who did like Joel. Like I think that's a really creative and interesting way to go about it, and I hope that like people that are feeling like Joel wasn't done justice will give it a chance and see what it's like to feel uncomfortable with the narrative, because not everyone felt uncomfortable with the narrative of The Last of Us 1. And I like
Laura,
The
what
Last
did
of
you
Us
want
2.
to say?
The Last of Us 2 makes almost everyone feel uncomfortable to some extent, and I think that's a really powerful storytelling device.
Laura,
I
what
had
did you
two
want to say?
things I wanted to very quickly throw into discussion, just because I've had them on my mind since early in the thing, and I just wanted to get them out. One thought is, for those players who get 2 hours in and see Joel die and are like, I don't like this, don't want to keep playing. I fucking love Joel as a character. I am furious that he's gone. I wish more of those people would have that moment and go, I'm going to keep playing because I am furious that Joel is dead. Because that's Ellie's perspective. Like that, Ellie is such a good inroad for players to go, I don't like that Joel has been killed. I'm furious. I need to go on this vengeance mission. Like, it's such a good vehicle to get people to keep engaging with it, to get to the point where they start getting Abby's perspective. Like, I wish more players would look at it and go like, hey, no, it's not the game hasn't done something bad by you hating that Joel is dead. That is the main character's perspective right now you are feeling. They've done something good. The other thing I wanted to throw in was just, I didn't think I wanted a sequel to the original The Last of Us, because that game had such a, I didn't think I wanted anything after that ending. And I must say, I'm really impressed that they gave a story that I felt justified having a sequel. It felt like it added meaningful things to that relationship dynamic. And I was impressed by that. I honestly didn't expect to walk away from this feeling like I had a more satisfying understanding than the original game did, because the original game ended so succinctly. So yeah, I'm impressed that they gave the story I actually wanted.
I'm with that too. I think for me, Last of Us Part 2 is my favorite video game sequel that I played. Like, the ways in which it's a sequel, I think it succeeds so well, because I'm with you, Laura, that I coming out of Last of Us 1, I didn't think that I would want a Last of Us 2. I think Last of Us 1 felt very definitive. And very, I think that game worked so well. It's just a standalone story and a standalone game that I didn't necessarily want to see them continue it and possibly fumble it. And I mean, not ruin the universe, because I don't really, like, I'm not necessarily one a person who's like, oh yeah, this new thing ruined the old thing, but I felt like Last of Us 1 stood so well on its own, and I think this game did a good job of, I described it, and this is a cheesy way to describe it, but I say it anyway because I don't mind being cheesy. For me, this game struck me as like the Avengers Endgame of Last of Us, in the way that I feel like Last of Us Part 2 rewards you so much for being a fan of Last of Us Part 1. It references Last of Us Part 1 so well. It piggybacks off of Last of Us Part 1 so well, and it understands the thematic elements and what worked about The Last of Us Part 1 and how to evolve from that so well. And Last of Us Part 2 stands so well on its own as its own individual story and as a thing that is so different from Last of Us Part 1, but still feels like it's evolved from Last of Us Part 1, right? Like the way in which they implement the doctor and Abby's story and all that stuff, comes straight from Last of Us Part 1. The way in which in the scene I referenced earlier in this podcast about like Joel interrogating the dudes, and being like, all right, point here. If this guy doesn't match up, then you're dead, right? Seeing Ellie reference that in this game and even implement that technique in this game in crucial moments, and seeing the ways in which she learned and which she grew from Joel, I think was done so well. All the references they made, right? Like early on, Ellie made a reference to, oh yeah, we ran into cannibals, right? Which immediately like makes me flash back to David in the first game in that sequence. Like they do such a good job of continually referencing, and not just referencing, but I guess rewarding you for playing the first game, and taking what worked and evolving it and making it feel like something new, but also something that isn't disrespectful to Last of Us 1. I think they do such a good job of it.
Yeah, and it's something that like I'm not sure like if there was a wait, right before I leave the room. Okay, if there was a Last of Us Part 3, like I don't know if I'd want it to be Lev, because I feel like the cycle of violence has like perpetuated for a lot of different timelines. Like this idea of Ellie learning what violence is and adopting it. Like I think blessing what you've pointed out and what other people on this podcast have pointed out of like Ellie replicating what she's seen, which is, hey, I tell you where the map is and then you like do it and then I kill one of you. Like I think hate is very much a learned behavior in a lot of ways in real life and then a lot of ways in The Last of Us. And I think seeing Lev like do that behavior, like I don't know if it would be powerful in the way that it was in The Last of Us 2. So like I'm not really sure what I would want. I definitely want Last of Us 3 because I love the world building they're doing, but I don't know if I want it to just double down on what hatred is.
Want Ellie finding Dana?
I think it would have to be a different game because obviously, like, I don't think The Last of Us 1 and 2 are necessarily trying to tell the same thing. Like, The Last of Us 1 is horrible situations, but there's hope at the end of the tunnel. It's about persevering through horrible times because if we can just get through it, there's this there.
Yes.
Last of Us 2 is cyclical violence with no, hopeful thing at the end. It's,
for sure.
Going further and further and further down like that dark rabbit hole. And that's the thing. I don't, much like I didn't want to explore what The Last of Us 1 touched again in The Last of Us 2, I wouldn't want The Last of Us 3 to be more the cyclical nature of violence. I'd want it to be trying to explore some other facet of living in a horrible situation.
See, I feel like Lev could be a good I guess avenue for what Last of Us Part 3 could be, because Lev wasn't involved in that cycle of hate.
Dina
like Lev and Dina, right? Like,
yeah,
and I know this. I know this wouldn't happen because it's corny and it's Hollywood and it wouldn't make sense within the world. But like, what if at some point like we're playing as an older Lev and he meets up with JJ the baby who's now Ellie's age, or when I say Ellie's age I mean like 14.
Yeah.
And what if they partner up and what if they have an adventure? And I know that doesn't make sense, but me as a fan, I'm like, what could happen?
No, for sure. I like the idea of Last of Us 3 being more than hate, because like Last of Us 1 was not about hate. It was about like, hey, sometimes you get a gig that you don't really want, but you're doing it. Like I think a lot of us have freelanced and we know what that gig is. Like, all right, we're gonna do it because you have to. It
really is about hope and connection, though.
Yeah, it's about hope and connection, but after the pain of freelancing is what Last of Us 1 is.
For sure.
Like at a certain point, I think, after the winter scene in Last of Us 1, Joel feels an emotional connection to Ellie. And, like, I love the power of The Last of Us 1 where, like, I feel like as me being Ellie, even though I'm Joel, like, I feel empty and hollow and fucking sad. And, like, I love that Ellie has those feelings towards The Last of Us 1, even if they're not distinctly told to the player, versus like Last of Us 2 where Ellie is just like this ball of hate, and as much as you want to interpret it as her being something greater, like what she presents is hatred and saltiness and wanting to do this for no other reason than to have said you done it. Like that's basically what Ellie is at the point of the end of Last of Us Part 1. I am not sure. Like, I want a Last of Us 3, but I don't know, like, what could be the driving motivation in it.
Yeah,
Because
that's the
like
difficulty.
it went from obligation in part 1 to hate in part 2. Like, what's the next thing? Like, I'm not sure what that is, but I definitely want to see it because I love the idea of like The Last of Us being this series that isn't so much about like who the Last of Us are, but who like the remaining people exist in this world and what they feel and what their motivations are. Like, that's a lot more interesting to me than this idea of like the apocalypse.
I think it also depends on the way that you frame it, because to me, like I said in my review, I see The Last of Us 2 as a story about love more than
Mhm.
hate. Just because the actions that Abby and Ellie take are all out of love and loss, like more so than hatred. It is because they want to honor the memory of the people that they loved most. The Last of Us 1 is about, you know, discovering that you love someone in the most unexpected of circumstances, and even fighting back against that love like Joel did for so long until he really couldn't hide the fact that he began to see Ellie as his daughter. And so I think I see The Last of Us as a series about love, and about human connections and the bonds that we have. And that sounds super cheesy and whatnot, but I that's what I see it as, and so I think The Last of Us 3 could focus on that in a different framework. And I think if we've learned anything from The Last of Us 2, it's that they can really deliver on another game that we think we might not, want, or that we don't know what we want out of, and that it'll turn out maybe even more satisfying than the last one. So I'm really hopeful, and yeah, this is just my plea to Naughty Dog. Like, please let us like try to find Dina as Ellie. Please, I need my girlfriends
Oh my God.
reunited.
That could
Like,
be the DLC,
please.
right?
Yeah,
Like,
that's
Multiple,
true.
please.
or
Like,
whatever it was.
Yeah, like
what's gonna
listen, just
happen with that? Like,
either the DLC or the third game. Like, I am serotonin deficient, Naughty Dog. Please, can
Hear
you
me out, though. Hear
please?
me out. Last is Part 3. It's a prequel. It's taking place during the apocalypse, and you're playing is Nathan Drake's daughter from Uncharted 4. Spoilers. I just spoiled Uncharted 4 if you haven't played it. But you're playing as Nathan Drake's daughter, and it's during the apocalypse, and it turns out she's a badass, killing all those clickers.
And she's gay.
And she's gay. Why not? Yeah, like,
Yeah.
she's gay.
obviously. Yeah, like, I'm interested to see. I don't think this is the end for Naughty Dog, both from a narrative and also a
For The Last of
money,
Us.
right? Money,
Yeah.
like it's all about money at the end of the day. Like, we have to
Capitalism
acknowledge
drives
that.
storytelling. Like, a
Absolutely.
story is finished when capitalism says it is, and it continues until capitalism says that it
Yes,
should
I think that's a
continue.
great
There's no
example.
capitalism
Like,
in the Last of Us universe, though.
It-
You know?
like
Anything
we
can
like to think, but like it is crazy seeing like, and I don't know how you guys felt about this, but seeing this game and like I absolutely adore this game. I love it. I think it's one of the best games I've played in the generation. Like, oh, I love it.
My
But
favorite game ever
it's
now.
done from like unethical practices, and like that's definitely
Yes.
something that like I think about a lot when engaging with it, and like it's a lot to unpack. I'm not asking you to unpack it now, but like it's an interesting dynamic in like trying to move the industry forward in a positive way while also trying to acknowledge what like games are made that are really freaking good. And like Last of Us 2 is, to me, it is a masterpiece of a game. I think it's amazing. I think it impacts in a way that like I won't stop thinking about ever.
Yeah.
Like, that's why I did this episode, just to like get it out there because it is so like ingrained in me. But at the same time, I'm like, damn, it sucks that like you worked a fucking ton of hours
Laura,
on
would you
it.
like to say?
Yes,
The-
and I think a lot of people in our industry relate to that. Like, I think we don't talk about crunch in games and in games media a lot, but it is very much
Yeah,
a
it's
thing.
important to talk about. Laura, what did you want to
Absolutely.
say?
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I one thing that I thought about a lot while playing, and I've tried not to be too praising of the excessive small details in this game that, while
Yes.
fantastic, are
Yes.
completely unnecessary. Like, the one that always stands out to me is like, that's fantastic, that's amazing, you did not need to crunch people to put this in the game, is when you pick up a rope or a hose and your character automatically like starts spooling it around their arm. That's a great detail.
Yes.
That's the kind of thing where it's
Not
like, you could
necessary.
have cut that and had X number of hours fewer crunch for people, and the game would still have been fantastic.
You
Like,
also didn't need to name every NPC because this game is just an act of killing people after people. The notes that they leave behind in the areas are much more effective at humanizing the
Yes, they're
NPCs
like
than giving
Kevin's
them
dead, and I'm
Sarah.
like, I'm just trying to get through Capitol Hill.
I don't
Yeah,
know,
like,
man.
I don't care if they killed Sarah.
When they
Like,
called for their dog and the dog had a name, I was like, oh snap! I killed
The
that
dogs
man's dog.
did, and I know it's
I
because
did
I'm
it.
trash, and like I only care about dogs and not people. But like the dogs have, like I liked the contrast of like
We haven't even talked
dogs
about
having
Alex.
names. Yeah. Oh my God. Yes, but like the dogs having names, and then you go to see the dogs, and then you're like I
Yeah.
like how this game makes you confront the destruction you created. Is the main
But
thing
again,
that like I feel about
a
it.
few of those is fantastic. An occasional I'm calling out for my dog who is now dead. Occasionally that's great. You don't need 200 names in one building of individual names of you killed Frank, oh you killed Sarah, oh you killed Jessica.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah,
It's those levels of excess detail that like
are not
I feel
necessary.
bad praising knowing the practices
Yeah.
that made the game.
I know
Yeah,
for
perhaps,
me
but,
it's,
you know,
it's such a difficult thing for me to judge because like I know reading the stories and reading the reports and reading about like the practice at Naughty Dog and this is kind of a thing for me in games in general when it comes to crunch and work culture and the final product of a game. Like it's so interesting like actually like reading you know what workers have to say about the product. Like the example I go to a lot is Telltale and No Clips. Their documentary about Telltale and the closure of Telltale and how all that stuff kind of played out. Because the thing that blew me away is kind of seeing how people who worked at Telltale and that were screwed over by Telltale, how much they were still passionate about a game that they had coming out that was announced that they were very, very much looking forward to, while at the same time being like, oh yeah, like this company's kind of screwing me over in terms of hours worked and in terms of pay compensation, in terms of all these different things. And I know for me, like it's always tough because I know as I'm playing a game, I'm like, all right, yeah, like people worked hard on this, and like a lot of the work that people put into this might have been unethical, but also like the same people that crunched on this thing are also are also very passionate about it. And like I remember reading, I think it was a Jason Schreier report. He was talking about at least I'm attributing to Jason Schreier. I'm not positive it's Jason Schreier.
I think I know the piece you're on about, and it was Schreier.
Yeah, there is essentially talking about how like they're the small details that you see in a Naughty Dog game and how like, oh yeah, like I stayed and I worked and I made sure that like when you shoot this bag of sand, the bag of sand deflates just right, and like that was somebody's passion project that they did. And it's one of those things where it's like, God, that is an unnecessary amount of work, but also like there's somebody out there that's like very like that is very proud of that work. And it's always like a tough thing to balance because like on the side of Naughty Dog as a company and specifically like, you know, the managers over there and people that are at the top that are able to facilitate like the work culture there, right? Like they have a responsibility that according to reports they're not carrying out and that they should carry out, right? Like you should hire people that are in charge of production and making sure that those pipelines are being met in a way that isn't putting high stress on your workers. You should be making sure that people aren't sleeping at the office. You should be making sure that your game is being made in a way that is healthy for your workers, right? And isn't bad for the industry, especially when you're the industry standard. But also like, you know, I know for a fact, like even, like to the point of rolling up the rope, I like when that happens, I'm like, man, I know for a fact that somebody out there is probably very happy with the work they put on this rope. But to what you're saying, like, you know, how worth it is it? And it's always like a difficult thing for me to balance as I'm playing the game.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up because I think we would be remiss to not, even in this very casual conversation we're having, to not bring that up as like an issue because like I absolutely adore Last of Us 2. I do. I can't deny it. It is just the fact of life, but like at the same time, like seeing the detail and seeing what went into it and thinking about how much work that was. You know, especially as like someone that writes guides and like I do much like I don't know, granular work, I think is a fair assessment than like other people might do. It's something I'm always thinking about and trying to like work with my team on. And I think I think games media is a very crunchy industry in general, and one thing that gives me hope is that like we're even talking about this as like a thing. A few years ago, I feel like it wouldn't even been mentioned. So like obviously, is this the end all be all? No, but like I like that this is something that we're starting to become aware of and think about like. Yes, is it great that like there's that detail that I think Greg Miller I think might have been the original person that pointed this out, but where you could hear the like where it turns in the safes in Last of Us 2, which is very cool.
Oh yeah, you
Yes.
can crack safes without
That's
actually
what
getting the codes, which is fucking
that's
wild.
who I learned it from. I don't know if he's like the
Yeah.
original, but like that's who I learned it from. That's awesome. And like I respect the fuck out of people in Naughty Dog that made that happen, but like at the same time, like it is a very I think even if we can't solve the problem here today, like I think acknowledging that is a difficult problem to love a game so much, love the details, but also want like those people that made that happen have appropriate compensation, I think is like a worthwhile subject to touch on. So I'm glad you brought up Blessing because I think that's a very big thing in our industry.
I think it was
and like,
Laura or Natalie that might have brought it up.
oh yeah, like well, you piggyback on what Natalie brought up. Then, like, I think a lot of times because we're covering games media, I think a lot of times we feel like, well, who am I to say I'm working a lot when like the people that make it work way more? But I think crunch trickles down. And I feel like it definitely is a thing that I feel optimistic that we're finally bringing up and kind of talking about and unpacking. Because as much as like I fucking love The Last of Us 2, I think it's a masterpiece of a game. But like I also like I want really good working conditions for the people that are making this because it's awesome and also like people deserve good working conditions.
It's something that I've seen among all the devs that I've followed recently and become mutuals with on Twitter is like they all take so much pride
Yes.
in this project. They all love this project so much. And I think there's a way that we can advocate for better working conditions without disparaging the work that they have put in and the love that they have put into this. Because, like, those things aren't mutually exclusive, right? Like, the more time that you spend on a project, chances are the more attached that you are to it. Like, this is like how many years of people's lives? Maybe 7?
Yes.
That's a long time. And so I think I've seen a lot of the developers on the team acknowledge the importance and appreciation of games media, tackling the labor issues and whatnot. But the ways that we tend to do that can sometimes be a little mired and sort of punching at the wrong directions. I think games media and people as a whole sometimes tend to, in trying to, punch in the right direction, we sort of end up missing. And so, unfortunately, that's something that I want to avoid doing when talking about the labor issues and whatnot. That there's so much love that these developers have for the project, and
Absolutely.
I'm sure there's a way that we can talk about it.
And I
while
think that
respecting
love,
it.
like, which I absolutely have for my job, and I think a lot of us in the industry, like on this call, have for their industry as well. We all work in the same industry. Is that like that love can sometimes be quote unquote exploited because like we all like love what we do, and that's a great powerful thing. But like if that's being used for the wrong reasons, it can end up being malignant. So like for me, that's the thing I have to check myself on a lot too because like obviously, or maybe not obviously, but like I love doing what I do, but I have to like account for myself in like going too far in ways that like maybe aren't healthy and like looping at my boss about that stuff. So I think I love that games media is pushing towards calling out unfair labor practices, but I would love more if games media called out their own unfair labor practices and discussed that a little bit more because there is so much crunch in the industry and it only gets more crunchier down you go and like Natalie, I know you're like a freelancer and I don't need to tell you how crunchy that industry is because you live it every day and I lived it as well.
I played this game in less than 2
I
days.
saw that and like this isn't anything that's like a slight, but like, and I really appreciate that like I'm assuming ESE of Paste said like, hey, you don't have to do that. But the reality is like, I think we do feel those pressures because we love what we do.
You feel
we
that pressure.
Do it. Yeah, we want to do it because we love doing what we do at a high scale. And I think like what I am looking to push for more in the next coming year and the next coming years is finding ways to be more ethical in our practices of work with how we treat ourselves and how we treat our freelancers as well.
Why did I say that?
I know I have agreed to deadlines that were shorter than I probably should have agreed to.
Yes, you do whatever it takes because like you love what you do, so like you just have
Yeah.
to do it. Like I've done crazy shit and crazy
I know
amounts of
for-
time because I want to.
This 120-hour JRPG, yeah, I'll get that done this week, sure.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Blessing what
for
we
me,
can
like a big example is like was it or it was a couple weeks ago, when all the protests were happening for Black Lives Matter. That was probably the busiest week I've had in terms of people reaching out and being like, "Hey, would you like to guest on our shows?" Because people during that week especially wanted to have black representation because the games industry is filled with white people. And I know for me,
energy all year round.
Yes, like
and that's what I'm saying. And also, I don't want to say anything. Well, I do want to say things, but I don't want to point fingers. But I'm just saying the amount of requests I got that week outweigh the amount of requests I've gotten for the rest of the year, like combined. And so that's all I'm saying. But yeah, during that week, like that was such a busy week for me. I was hosting games daily every single day. I was on probably like 2 to 3 more shows outside of that every single day, right? And we try to limit ourselves on Kind of Funny to under 3 shows because we know like that's the limit for us in terms of when exhaustion starts to set in. And that was a super, super busy week and a super, super stretched week for me. And that was a thing for me where I was like, all right, like this is unnecessarily busy. And for me as somebody who wants to do good at what I do, right? Like I'm doing it. And I'm allowing myself to do it by my own volition, right? I also feel some kind of pressure to do it because the industry is kind of looking for people to have that voice and be visible. And like within all that, right? Like I have the complaint of, yeah, I'm doing way too much. Like I'm working like a very long work week right now. On the other side of it, it was the most satisfying work week for me, right? I came out of that work week feeling very, very revitalized and very high in terms of, man, like that was a great week of work. I'm proud of what I did, and that is very much to a much lesser degree on kind of how I can or what might crunch be like for a lot of developers, right?
Yeah.
Where it is like, fuck, I feel pressured to do this from whether it's my work environment or whether it's the higher ups or whether it is like me staying at the office till 9 p.m. doing this thing. But at the same time, I'm fucking like proud of this. I don't know, the way the grass blows in the wind in The Last of Us Part 2.
Yeah, like I love
Crunch
that you.
Crunch is wild, and it's like a difficult thing to kind of I guess grasp and kind of get a clear I'm not gonna say a clear solution for it because I think there are clear solutions, but it's messy.
Yeah, it's difficult
overall.
because it's like on one hand, I don't want to just not acknowledge the fucking awesome work that this team did because holy cow, I love this game. It's like one of the games that has resonated with me more than maybe any other game in this generation. Like I'm willing to say that, and like it's been so powerful for me. But at the same time, like it's been something that has been made in times of crunch, in times of distress potentially, and like how do I respond to that? And like I think a lot of things that you brought up, Blessing, with like the conflict are very fair, and like even though we might not come to like a conclusion that helps further the industry, I think the fact that we are even having these conversations are a benefit towards moving the needle in the right direction of like having thought on this, because like a few years ago we probably would have never had this discussion. I think the fact that we can have this here or in any context is beneficial of just talking about
For
like
sure.
how much work it takes to make this product that we all like love and appreciate and enjoy analyzing so much. Like I think that's something that's really important to me.
I think it's also even bigger than the studio itself. I mean, the studio has to meet the deadlines of the demands of Sony. So even if, from what I've heard, management and scheduling has been improved since the Kotaku report. It's still a work in progress though. But there is the fact that ultimately all the developers at Naughty Dog, from the ones at the bottom to the ones at the top, have to adhere to the deadlines and the budgets and all the
yeah.
layers
It's such
of Sony as
It's such a
publisher.
big systemic structured
Yes.
thing because you imagine that like there are so many cogs in this machine, right?
Yes.
Last of Us was supposed to come out in February. It getting delayed till spring probably meant that Ghost of Tsushima got delayed, right? To whatever it got delayed. Like especially with Last of Us Part 2 being a Naughty Dog game, which then means it gets priority over probably 99% of Sony titles. Or there aren't that many Sony titles, so I guess I should say like 90% of Sony titles. Like, you know, the role in which that game plays also within the generation, right? Like this isn't a game that you want to come out on PS4 in 2021, and so you imagine that at a certain point, like Sony from the very top up is like, all right, like we give you guys priority. We want this game to be perfect. At the same time, this cannot come out fall this year because the PS5 is coming out fall this year. Get this thing done. You imagine that, like, from the top down, those conversations are happening. You imagine that also, like, the ways in which Ghost of Tsushima and Iron Man VR come into play are also like a big thing, along with Spider-Man Miles Morales. Like, you know, there's a lot of games involved to juggle in terms of how are we going to make these games happen in a way that is timely for Sony as the big company here, and like Sony as like the top of the chain here, like how they want to make things happen. And yeah, like it's so it's difficult, right? And it is like crunch isn't a video game specific thing, but in terms of video games as an entertainment medium, video games are just so fucking complicated to make, right? Like it is
It's a miracle they get
it
made.
is story, it is
Like, I
gameplay,
truly
it is
believe when
technology.
every seasoned developer says it's a miracle that video games get shipped.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm-
100%.
Like,
A
it's
video
wild.
game doesn't fall apart as soon as you try playing it is magic.
Yes.
Yeah, like there's a quote that Greg keeps bringing up that I think is so Greg Miller keeps bringing up that I think is so like pertinent, that for so many developers, I forget who exactly said this, like what developer said this, but like a lot of times you don't know if a game's fun until after it's made.
Yeah.
Like a lot of times you don't know like if this thing works until like you're in the final stages of it and you're like, all right, cool, like thank God this game works and it's fun. Video games are just so complicated and like so multifaceted in terms of all the different things that come to it, from art to technology to story to all these different things to voice acting and performance. Like and of course, like none of those are excuses for toxic workplaces or crunch.
Right.
But I think that is a big part in why we see it being such a big problem to kind of grapple with, alongside like just the bigger industry around it. And I don't want to make excuses for video games being a young industry either, because like video games have been around for, I guess, what, 40 years, 50 years. But you know, like compared to movies, compared to a lot of other industries, like video games are still growing, and
Yeah.
video games are growing in a way that are making them more and more difficult to make, because the technology is getting more and more advanced, and there's more and more polygons, and hopefully like an SSD in the PS. And now I'm going on a tangent, and I apologize. But now, like, we're getting an SSD in the PS5. Hopefully, that makes things easier in some ways. Hopefully, the ways in which next gen advancements are going, that doesn't make games harder to make, maybe easier. Who knows? But yeah, man, it's wild out there. Like, and I hope to see it get better. I hope you know what Janet's saying, right? Like us talking about it and us bringing it to the forefront, and us trying to make these things as transparent as possible, you know, helps for audiences to see, and for even like higher ups to be aware that like we understand this is happening. We want to see it be better, and if it doesn't get better, then we're not going to be happy with it. We're going to be upset. I hope that's the case. I really do.
Yeah, and like I don't know how you feel about Blessing or anyone else on this chat, but like it's complicated in that, like, if I consume the media, I know it's not ethically made, and I talk about it, is that me being complicit in the situation? And like I don't have a good answer for that, but like I think that is another layer of in which we are complicit in crunch. And that's really difficult. Like I don't have a good answer for that on how to deal with it. Like I deal with it the way I do, which is I still talk about games and I add a caveat, but like, is that caveat enough? And I think those are like, but the fact that we are having those conversations of like, what are the ethics? What should we be doing? What is the best thing for like other teams? Like I like that we as an industry are having that conversation and figuring out what the ethics are on that. I think it's gonna take a while to like downpack what that is for us, like as a community, but like I like that we're struggling with that. Like as much as I hate having to face that and think about the ways that I'm complicit in crunch and the way that I like inadvertently advocate for crunch culture, because I am very big on working hard and like doing a lot of stuff. I like that I'm forced to face those issues because they're very real issues in what we deal with as games media, and then that extends to people making games as well. So I don't have like a nice like fuzzy thing on this. Like I absolutely adore The Last of Us 2, but at the same time, like I do wish that it was made in a more ethical standpoint, and I am forced to reflect when playing The Last of Us 2, which is an excellent game, freaking brilliant. Love it, one of my favorites of the generation. I'm forced to kind of confront my own ways in which I'm complicit in crunch culture and try to push back against that and try to make like a better circumstance for game journalists and game developers across the country.
For sure.
I think it's
This is a
about
great
ready
discussion,
for me
guys.
to head off. It's 5:30 in the morning. The sun's fully risen.
No,
How
I don't
long
know
have we been going?
how
Are we
you're
3.5
here.
hours
the
in?
fact that Laura, can we give a shout out really quick to the fact that Laura is here and alive because it is.
What
so
time
late
is it
for her.
over there, Laura?
5:30 a.m.
It's 5:30. She took a nap to be here, which is like, and like as dark as I'm ending it, like I have thoroughly enjoyed chatting with all of you.
This has
about
been a
The Last of Us.
blast.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
been very fun.
It's been lovely. It's been well worth doing because I still have so much to unpack about this
Me
game, but like
too.
it's been so good to just get some thoughts out because
Oh,
if
yeah.
nothing else, this game I have a
Maybe-
lot of opinions.
Maybe do it again in a week or two. I don't know. Once
No, like I'm not against.
Let's just
that
start a
at
Last
all.
of Us Part 2 podcast. Why
But,
not?
like,
Let's just
yeah,
do it.
Like they have
exactly.
the official Last of Us podcast. Why can't we have the unofficial Last of Us podcast?
We can have the better one. Who's on that podcast? I assume it's Haley and Neil. We can have a better one. What do they have to say about you?
Exactly. Just like
Let's
fans
invite
on-
Haley to this one. Haley Gross, if you're listening, can you please join us?
No, but for real,
I'm
it's
down
fun.
to the podcast with Haley. Well, in fact, I think I know Kind of Funny is we're doing our Spoilercast with Neil,
Cool.
I think Laura Bailey and Troy,
Oh,
and
wow.
I'm not on it because Greg's on it. And all I'm saying is that if we can get Haley, then I don't have to be jealous anymore.
Yeah.
And so
Are
Haley,
you
if you're
on the
listening to
other
this-
Try
one?
it.
I'm gonna be on the other one. I hope you're there with me. I'm gonna
yes,
be on the
I will.
fan
I will
one.
be on the one that you're on.
Okay, good. So, like I'm
Yeah.
excited. It's gonna be fun.
For sure,
But
it's gonna be great.
Laura, you were wrapping up. Go ahead, do your wrap up. If we can do
Yeah,
another one,
yeah.
I would love to. I had a really good time talking to all of you about just like
Yeah.
the thoughts I had and the feelings I had over the game. 'cause
Depending on
it's very
schedules,
complicated.
I'm up for another.
Yes.
Same.
See,
Let's talk about Uncharted 4, guys. Let's go through all the Naughty Dog games.
Let's just play it. Like,
No.
just 1, 2, 3 though. I have it. Like I do have it ready to go. But yeah, I'm kind of sad ending this, but this has been very fun. I've enjoyed talking to you guys, and like
Needed
the
after
number one thing, yes, the number one thing
Monster.
I like about talking about games in a like more formal critical standpoint is like I just like learning more about my take through hearing your guys' take, and I really liked Laura and Blessing and Nat and everyone else that has been here that has already dipped out. Like I've enjoyed learning more about what I think about the game through your guys' commentary, and that's what I really highly value in doing these discussions. So yeah, it is sad to hit
Hell
stop
yeah.
on the recorder, but I will do so very soon, and we'll see. Maybe we'll do this again sometime. It's been very,
Also, thank you to anyone who watches all of this.
Oh yeah,
Like,
shout out to anyone who
yes,
makes it
shout
this
out
far.
to people that
Shout
are
out to
watching
everyone
this
who-
whole ass podcast, because there will be 3 of you that do, and like shout out to 3
Because, like, I think we all have really great and brilliant thoughts, but I mean, 3 hours is a lot, or
Yes.
however long it's been. Yeah, it's been like, or 3.5
like
hours.
It's
3.5
been
hours.
It's been a
I'll be
minute.
honest. I'm sleep deprived and a little bit drunk, so like I don't know whether our thoughts were good or not. Probably.
God, drunk at
They
5:30
were.
is
Though, like,
We all-
I've also really liked doing this with you guys, where it was like very candid, because so many of the things we do are very like formalized, and I like having stuff
Yeah.
that is just like us reminding ourselves of like why we started doing this, which is because we like talking about games and we like to like bring it down and all that.
It's nice to have a setting where you can just go. I don't know. I don't have a whole article's worth of thought
Yeah.
on this yet. But
Yeah,
Like, I have
Yes.
messy feelings about what is a messy game. Like,
Absolutely.
that should be normalized. But yeah, this is so needed because being on Twitter, like being on social media is something that we have to do for our jobs. Like, we just have to do that, and it has been so aggravating to do that
Yes.
and watch not just misinformation, but aggravating discourses from all sides on this game. And so talking about it in a setting where we can filter out thoughts, we can like be messy with our thoughts, we can say I agree or I don't know if I agree without it being like this subtweet that is like passive aggressive in nature. Like it is so refreshing and this game has so much nuance that it deserves to be talked about in a format with this much
Can we
nuance.
can we say real quick where people can find us and find our work?
Absolutely. Blessing,
Yeah.
you gonna kick us off on that?
Of course, yeah, of course. I've been Blessing again. You can find me on Twitter at Blessing Junior. And I do work for Kind of Funny, youtube.com/kindoffunnygames.
Cool. I'm Jen Garcia. You can find me at GameOnysus. That's Game ONYSUS. And you can find me for myriad of topics, game help, and other. My main thing is running guides for IGN.com.
I'm Laura. You can find me at Laura K Buzz on Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, Patreon, all of the things. I freelance for a bunch of places. I do a bunch of writing at the moment for Sci-Fi Fangirls. And every Friday on YouTube, I upload a video about video game industry accessibility and representation. And the title of that series is Accessibility. So check that out.
Yeah, and I'm Natalie Flores. I am the weekend writer at Fanbyte, though maybe by the time that this airs, I'm going through some role changes. Wink, wink. So, let's see. I'm not sure when this will get uploaded. But yeah, as of this recording, I'm the weekend writer at Fanbyte and a general freelancer in the industry. You can find me at Twitter on Heartemecia. That is Heart IMECIA. And also shout outs to Lucy O'Brien on Twitter and also Jean Park on
Kelly.
Twitter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or Gene Park. Who's Gene Kelly?
Yeah.
Gene Kelly's a famous dancer, isn't he?
You can find those who are in our hearts and on the empty spaces of the skull. This call. Yeah, it's late. Yeah. Oh my God.
What time zone are you in, Natalie?
I am it's 1 almost, but I have work tomorrow. But I have work tomorrow.
It is
That's what's messed up. Me and Janet are in SF, and so it's 9:30. I'm ready to party.
Yeah, yeah, and I have to work tomorrow, but it's been so fun that it's totally okay.
I absolutely appreciate both you and Laura, who I know Laura fucking slept before this call, and I really appreciate that.
I took a nap for this call.
Yes.
I do stuff with people in America. I've gotten used to starting work in the middle of the night.
Yes, but we still both appreciate you. Thank you for coming through for this call, and I guess we'll have to hit stop. I'm kind of sad almost because it's been fun.
We might come back. You never know.
Maybe some other time. It's been fun. Thank you guys so much for chatting with me and everyone else on The Last of Us Part 2, and we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.